Council meeting. Our meetings are public and you are welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there's no public comment. Please join us tonight during our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. We, of course, welcome your feedback anytime by mail to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476, or by email at council.comments@slcgov.com, or via our 24-hour phone comment line 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and are posted to our website, slccouncil.com. And now we will begin our work session. The first item on the agenda is an informational update from the administration. Hannah Barton is coming, as well as the birthday boy, Andrew Johnson, who, despite doing work that should make him look like a geriatric, he's still sporting a 30-year-old grin here. So, Andrew, should I have everyone sing now or wait until the finale? All right.
I didn't know it was your birthday. Happy birthday. Okay, thank you, council member. We'll go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. As always, just a reminder to everyone to visit the IMS Civic Engagement Team's website for regularly updated ways to engage with the city, otherwise known as the feedback page. And I specifically want to highlight on this page, there is a link for the University of Utah Baseball Stadium and possible Sunnyside Park improvements. It's linked there for residents to learn more and submit feedback. Next slide, please. There are a number of updates today from planning, so I'm going to try and go through this concisely. 4 items have been recommended by the Planning Commission for adoption and are in the process of being transmitted to this body, including the ballpark station area zoning map, historic overlay enforcement, regulations on demolition in historic districts if done without permits, and Title 18 amendments. 3 items are scheduled or tentatively scheduled for Planning Commission meetings, including allowing projecting signs in all commercial and mixed-use districts, prohibiting the demolition of housing for parking, and the adaptive reuse ordinance. And the remaining items on this list are in the early stages of the process. The mobile business text amendment is pending scheduling with the Planning Commission. The modifications to the Planning Commission and Historic Landmark Commission numbers is currently in the 5-day public engagement period. And the draft plan of the 2100 South Station Area Plan and zoning amendments has been received and is being reviewed by planning staff. Lastly, the Planning Commission has tabled the gas station near bodies of water item, and planning staff are working with gas station owners on updates. Next slide, please. The Sustainability Division currently has a climate priorities survey that's open now to understand residents' perception of air pollution and climate change. And this may help sustainability apply for and determine how to use federal funds made available through the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act to implement different climate actions throughout the country. The survey is linked on the feedback page. There's also a QR code here shown on the slides, and that survey is closing on February 11th. Next slide, please. As you all know, the community outreach team in the mayor's office, we hold community office hours at different areas throughout the city. And this is a list of our upcoming office hours in the month of February. And as a reminder, in 2024, we are holding office hours every other month and using the month prior to the event to get the word out and promote them to as many community members as possible to hopefully get a good turnout and increase that level of engagement with residents. So these are the different dates and locations across the city for the month of February. And that's all I have. I'll turn it over to the birthday boy.
Thank you. Madam Chair, is that fun to continue on? Okay. You'll see on the screen updates here, good news and bad news. Good news, people are utilizing all the shelter beds we have. Bad news is we are still short. That's why we're running at 99% capacity, both base year-round capacity and also winter beds. It's been relatively mild, as you know, temperature-wise, so we haven't had a cold blue in quite a bit here. May or may not happen in the near future, but we will have more code blue beds available, and we still have not maxed those out on those nights. So I want to make sure that's clear to the public that there are code blue beds for those closed nights available on those days. The encampment impact mitigation work and rapid intervention team work continue on this week at Folsom Trail and 10th West, Jordan River Trail, from North Temple really to 2nd South, the south side of North Temple. And then the rapid intervention team, in addition to their regular areas across the city, is also going to have some special time set aside for the Jordan River, really between Day Riverside south to Three Creeks confluence. So quite a large area there for the parks. Resource fair coming up this Friday at the Rescue Mission parking lot. That's on 4th West between 9:30 and 12:30. And then a special thank you to everyone here and online and out there who helped volunteer for the point in time count. Salt Lake County has a great turnout of volunteers, really helpful for us. And then additionally, if there are additional Code Blue days coming up, there's still need for volunteers. So we've shared that link before. If you go to the endutahhomelessness.org link, you can sign up still for Code Blue days, and that's deeply helpful for those providers. Next slide. The council's heard some of this before, but I wanted to make sure that I brought it up now in a timely manner for the state legislative session. Wayne Niederhauser and the governor's office have put forward a large spending request or a funding request to the legislature this year, breaking into 3 real areas. This is not all of the funding requests for these areas, but some highlights here. I want to make sure you're aware of that right now. Prevention, obviously, the middle one down, is the key piece long term. We need housing, and we need deeply affordable housing. We need the operating the grants to do that. We need the preservation fund to preserve current housing options. And then also there's a new home court pilot project, which is meant to help divert folks out of criminal justice who need to be in treatment and not necessarily the jail or incarceration options that way. Up at the top, this is critical for our city. As you all know, we have a shortage of shelter beds and we have a shortage of operating funds across the state. The $25 million identified here for low barrier shelter development, that would be for new. That would be for additional shelter we do not have near year-round. The $33.9 million would be for operations for that statewide. We need about $40 million a year. They've asked for it over 3 years, one-time money, to get us some breathing room to figure out a long-term strategy for that funding. The $27.3 million identified here, micro shelter community and other similar things. We need operations for those programs and that program going forward, especially as it grows. Winter response stabilization for 3 years is about $28.9 million, as you see, and then $10 million ongoing for homeless system funding statewide, and also the shelters mitigation fund, the $2.5 million, make that ongoing, so it's not a yearly allocation necessarily. That's a lot. I want to put it out there because this is critical. We have a choice to continue on with our current plans as we've done it for 3 to 4 years now, where we have just some in the summertime and a lot of people outside, and then more in the wintertime, and it closes every April. We can change that, but it's going to take a lot of people working together on this. The governor's office, we know a lot of state legislators are working on this, the county, Salt Lake City. We need everybody's help, business community, citizens, anybody who is interested in this situation. We need your help. Become educated, help us out in identifying how to go about this. The last piece here is behavioral health work, and there's a big thing here that's more the county related, but a part of that is helping incentivize more workforce development. We need more workers to come out of school into these programs and these agencies to help them to grow. We can't grow them any faster than we can find staff. So we need all these together, infrastructure, operations, and the staff to do so. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So you're just doing small things here and there, huh? Nothing.
I'm just trying to keep up with you all.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder to all of our constituents who may be tuned in, you are also constituents of a state. And so contacting your representatives, or really any representatives or senators, is not only a privilege you have, but a right. So if you, like us, think that solving this homelessness crisis with a unified strategy and adequate resources is important, you have that ability. And thank you for presenting that to us, Andrew. All right, we will now move on to the ordinance regarding the Yale Crest Laird Heights Local Historic District. Brian Fulmer will be joining us, as well as Lex Trauber. Did I say it right? Yeah? Are you not just pandering to me?
Say that again?
Not just pandering to me? I said it right? All right.
to Amy
And
from
Amy
planning.
Thompson.
Thank you, sorry.
No, that's okay.
This proposal would create the Yale Crest Local Heights Local Historic District on Laird Avenue between 1300 East and 1500 East, including Laird Circle and Uinta Circle in Council District 6. Some council members may recall the planning director's report to the council on May 2nd, 2023. During that briefing, the council asked planning staff to continue the local historic district designation process. A council briefing, public hearing, and vote are the final steps to create a new local historic district. I believe the petitioner is with us and would appreciate an opportunity to address the council. Now I'll turn it over to Lex.
Thank you. Next slide. Next slide, please. Just to refresh you, this is in the salmon colored, the proposed district. As Brian mentioned, it's from 13th to 15th East along Laird Avenue, including the 2 circles off of Laird. Next slide. Not only do we have the Laird Heights proposal, we also have another district just adjacent to the north, the Princeton Heights, and that has been transmitted, and you will be seeing that shortly. But that puts it all in context for you. The blue is Harvard Heights, and that is a district that's already been adopted. Next slide, please. So yes, we met with you in May at the point of the planning director report to city council. That's step number 5 on this flow chart. And since that time, we have been through an extensive public process, an extensive and thorough public process to get where we are today. And that point is for you to make a decision regarding this proposal. Next slide. This proposal does meet the zoning ordinance standards for map amendments that was outlined in the staff report for the Planning Commission and the Historic Landmark Commission. And I just wanted to throw up those 5 standards on this slide for you to see that it meets all of those standards for a map amendment, because that's what this is actually requesting, is to add an additional layer of regulation on that particular neighborhood. Next slide. Not only does it meet the standards outlined in the ordinance for map amendments, but the proposal also meets many policies that are outlined in the documents that you see here on the screen. So it is well supported through policies that the city has adopted. Next slide. So a vote took place, a property owner survey vote, and the results were that 49 property owners supported it, 9 opposed, and there were 10 property owners that did not vote. One of those property owners being Salt Lake City. We own a very tiny little strip of property adjacent to Laird, so we didn't vote on that, but it is overwhelmingly positive for the proposed district. Next slide. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to try to answer those for you.
Council members? Would we like to hear from Councilmember Deegan?
Could you just go over the percentages of the supported and the threshold for that, just for the record?
Yes. Hang on a second. Do you? I don't have those regs up in front of me. Hang on just a sec. So the number of return property owner opinion ballots was 85%, and that exceeds the required 2/3 threshold of ballots mailed and ballots in support of 72%. So ballots in support of 72% represents more than 50% of the numbers of parcels in the proposed local historic district. So it meets the thresholds that are outlined in our ordinance.
Yeah, okay. It
far exceeds it.
Yeah, it far exceeds. And so I applaud the neighborhood for actually voting on this, which is, you had
It was a good turnout.
85% turnout on the voting, which is pretty impressive. So that's good that we had a great engagement in that process. Thank you.
Did the petitioner want to come up and make a few comments? While she's coming, Councilmember Wharton.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to, in the interest of full disclosures, let everybody know that my husband, who's in the audience, did volunteer and met with some of these groups. He was not paid for any of his meetings and doesn't work for them, but I did want to disclose that just to be fully transparent with everybody. So there's no conflict of interest, but I wanted to say it anyway.
Thank you. Welcome.
Oh, hello. Good afternoon. I'm going to apologize for my voice right up front here. I've caught the cold that's going around the neighborhood. I'm not contagious. Let me just say, I'm getting over it. I've had it for 7 days, so I think I'm good. Okay. I'm Becky Woods. I am a retired school teacher who lives on Laird Avenue in Salt Lake City. Thank you for allowing me to explain why the proposed Laird Avenue Local Historic District is important to me, my community, and Salt Lake City as a whole. We started this process 18 months ago with the goal of preserving historic homes in our neighborhood after losing many in the past several years. As we watched these historic homes being demolished, 67 in total in the area, we saw large, overpriced houses go up in their place. Our neighborhoods went from middle class and upper middle class homes to prices that are unattainably high for most families. Neighborhoods like ours have become less affordable and more exclusive over the last 10 years. We feel that protecting these smaller family-sized homes is important to preserving whatever affordability may still exist within our neighborhoods. While working to establish this local historic district, we realized that our cause was bigger than we initially expected. The problems we've seen in our neighborhood are the same ones that are faced by other communities in our city and across the Wasatch Front. We believe that a historic district like ours could help temper wild increases in price while also contributing to the city's goals of sustainability, affordability, historic preservation, and overall well-being of Salt Lake City residents. Sustainability. Historic homes and neighborhoods are more sustainable than new builds. Historic homes do not release additional construction-related CO2 and VOCs, volatile organic compounds. It is estimated that new construction can release VOCs and CO2 for up to 60 years. And while we're glad to see our community growing, we should be conscious of which new construction projects offer the most benefit to the widest amount of people. Losing a historic single-family home for a newer, larger single-family home doesn't add units to the city's housing stock, but it does add construction-related emissions that strain the environmental capacity of our valley. The old-growth wood used in historic homes is also more durable than the new wood on the market. It's stronger, more resistant to infection and water damage. With regular maintenance, wood windows can last hundreds of years, where vinyl windows last an average of 20. The city can reach its sustainability goals by thoughtfully and strategically sparing historic homes from landfills. Affordability and density. Historic neighborhoods are traditionally more affordable, and with the city's recent zoning change, can provide more density. By preserving smaller historic homes, we are maintaining parts of our affordable housing stock. One doesn't have to look further than Rose Park to see how important maintaining these homes is for affordability of various communities and the city as a whole. Historic neighborhoods such as the avenues are some of the densest in the city. The City Council's recent zoning and land use changes embrace the missing middle housing stock and accommodate local historic districts as a strategy for keeping housing affordable and adaptable to current demands. Well-being. Numerous studies have shown that historic homes and neighborhoods improve the well-being of the community. Living in and around historic places or neighborhoods impacts emotional well-being through increased civic pride, a greater sense of place and identity, more social interaction, and increased community engagement. This is critical to those aging in place, like me, as well as young families, for whom historic neighborhoods improve interconnectedness and walkability. Ultimately, historic preservation is a people-centered endeavor. In an area of the city that has no indication of decreasing property values, preserving smaller historic homes can help balance new growth and increasing costs. The residents of Laird Avenue believe that a local historic district in this area is an asset to the city, not a threat. In closing, we realize many neighborhoods on both sides of Salt Lake City are facing similar challenges to what we're seeing. We stand ready to be good community partners with other neighborhoods in using historic preservation as a tool for responsible and sustainable growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. Councilmember, questions, comments, concerns?
No, again, just thank you for the engagement and thank you for the work across the board. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
I just have to say, my entree into the city and public service was through the Historic Landmark Commission, and so issues like this are kind of near and dear to my heart, and I have more experience with them than being a council member. And after getting to meet with you, Becky, and some of the other petitioners, I really love that you all are not just seeking to protect your own community, but you understand preservation in the context of a growing city. This is not a tool to function historically as they have with NIMBY issues. It's not a tool to disregard other parts and elevate your community. Your ability to see the entire city trajectory and to want to protect those things that are beautiful about your home really make me enthusiastic about this possibility and further collaboration with you in other areas around the city. So thank you for that.
No, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilman Romano.
I have a question for planning staff, Lex. If you could help me understand a little bit, I don't have any, it's a little less specific to this application, but more just local historic districts in general. When it comes to things like the affordable housing incentives ordinance that we recently passed, if a homeowner of a historic home or of a vacant lot in a local historic district were to want to develop new construction, how does being in a local historic district make that different? And I kind of know the answer, but I don't know it specifically, and I think the public would probably be interested as well.
So if the local historic district is adopted, or even one of our local historic districts, say, for example, someone owns a home or a building and they want to demolish that, they would have to go through a demolition process before the Landmark Commission. If it is a vacant lot, and so back up a little bit, if they are successful in their bid for demolition, then they would be able to demolish, and then they would also have to go through a process with the Landmark Commission for new construction.
Yeah.
So in that process, we're looking at compatibility, how the new structure would fit into the streetscape.
And even if they don't demolish, but they were to add, say, an ADU or additional add-on to the existing home, it would be that same process. What are the, because I think for me, the local historic districts, the preservation of the historic structures is positive. The restrictions on new structures being built is what I have a little bit of a harder time wrapping my head around, because I think that, to me, as an architect, I don't think that like one specific style is necessarily should be preferenced above another. And I also think neighborhoods that have a mixture of different types of both buildings, age, but also size and style are what I prefer. So I think what this does to new construction is what's of greater interest to me. And this might be a broader question that we want to look at.
Well, and
overall.
with new construction, we're not necessarily looking for a recreation of some sort of historic structure. What we want to promote is something that, one, is compatible with the streetscape, but two, uses elements from historic structures in that new construction. So it can be a very modern looking building, but for example, there's many different examples up in Capitol Hill of very modern construction, but they have a somewhat of a traditional porch feature, or their window fenestration is more traditional rather than modern or whatever. And so there's a lot of flexibility with new construction.
Did that answer your question?
Not really, but that's okay.
Same question, but maybe like more pointedly. So just because there's a historic, let's say there's a lot that it was vacant, or they went through the process of demolishing it, just because all of it's in a historic district and most of the houses are on that street are Tudors, let's say, you don't have to build a Tudor.
No.
You don't have, let's say that some of them are craftsmen. You're not limited to Tudors or craftsmen, right?
No.
Okay.
Michaela's here to save the day.
So when you say that there might be things that they traditionally have to have, what I hear you saying is, like, if most of the houses in that neighborhood have a front porch, you might require them to have a porch, but it could still be a modern porch. Mm-hmm. It just, that fits with the rest of the house. They couldn't elect to have no porch.
But how does that?
If among the requirements, that might be one.
Generally,
correct?
Right. Like there could be an interpretation of some sort of front porch that could be entirely modern.
Okay.
It's any new construction just shouldn't be visually obtrusive on that block face, right? So when you're driving down the block face, it could be completely modern next to a very historic building, and we'd want to keep those elements, but yet it fits in, right? You're not just driving down the street and like, whoa, what is that brand new historic house there? But just getting to Councilmember Mano's question, I just wanted to add that the affordable housing incentives wouldn't preclude affordable housing units within our local historic districts.
I think it's who determines whether or not there are enough porches in the surrounding neighborhood to say this new construction must have a porch, or enough columns or divided light windows to say those are elements that you must have. It's the Historic Landmark Commission, right, that just sort of votes on that. I think for me as an architect, the practice is to not have what I'm allowed to do and not allowed to do clear, and it be interpreted by a group of volunteers, which I appreciate the work that they're doing, but it's really hard to say, like, we're going to go through this process, we're going to design this thing, present it to you, and then it's not clear whether or not that's approved. It's just whether that group of people are feeling like they like what I showed them that day, which makes it really hard. And then the client, if it's not approved, then the client pays the architect again, or not. Oftentimes we end up having to eat our fee and redo it. Like, it's a really unclear process. I understand existing buildings and whether, if they're contributing structures, that to me is a much clearer standard and appropriate. It's the new construction that feels unclear as to whether or not what I think is very appropriate and would fit is going to be approved by the Landmark Commission. And that's why I think just in general, I hesitate to create more local historic districts until we're able to figure out that, make it a little bit clear for someone that's trying to add construction into an existing, not demolish, demolition separate, but adding new construction, I think. So it's maybe more of a question of the process that I struggle with.
And if you had any specific examples or problematic examples that you've had, if you could pass those on to
Well,
us,
I
that'd be
have-
great.
I avoid doing work in local historic districts as much as possible because of this reason, because I have a really hard time knowing it's so different in different cities and things like that. So
I think we as staff too really try to work with applicants to get to a product that will be approvable by the Landmark Commission. That's always my goal. And that any given project may take a bit of massaging, but I think in general, most new construction gets approved.
I think so too. We have a handbook for new construction that's, for your regular citizen, for a design professional, and that's supposed to supplement what pretty robust new construction standards that we have. And part of the application process is hopefully is set up for that designer to take a look at the entire block face, to have an actual streetscape study. So they're taking a look at all of those design elements on a block face, and then to plan the appropriate new construction to fit in and meet those standards. That probably sounded like a bunch of gobbledygook, but.
All right.
And if you would ever be interested in actually going out and looking at some places, we would love to show you some examples.
Pretty great ones out there.
All right, thank you. All right, last word goes to Councilwoman Young.
So I agree with Councilmember Mono related to opportunities to clarify. I think at any point where we have determinations that depend on people as opposed to processes, that can generate different outcomes over time. With that said, I would also say that I appreciate that the neighbors have followed the process that we currently have outlined, and I would not want to hold up their progress in that process as we work to figure out and maybe solidify some of those standard operating procedures.
Thank you, Councilwoman. All right, friends, we are now 7 minutes past time, and I intend to be on time today. So thank you all.
Thanks.
This brings us to the zoning map and general plan amendment at 2445 South, 500 East, Woodland Commons. Brian Fulmer is going to maintain his seat. Trevor Ovenden and Wayne Mills will be joining him at the table.
Thank you. This is a proposal to amend the zoning and future land use maps for the property you mentioned. It's in District 7. It's currently zoned R1 7000 or single family residential, and the requested zone is RMF 35 or moderate density multifamily residential. The applicant's stated intent is to construct market rate for sale townhomes on the site. Some council members may recall a similar rezone at the adjacent 2435 South 500 East parcel the council adopted in 2022. I believe the applicant is with us and would appreciate an opportunity of addressing the council. Now I'll turn it over to Trevor.
Nope, can't. Now you can, hopefully. All right. So, like Brian said, this is a general plan and zoning map amendment at 2445 South, 500 East. Change slide, please. Okay, sorry, repeating a little bit here. So the applicant is requesting to rezone this property from R1 7000 to RMF 35 to allow for townhomes at this site. The general plan applicable to the site designates this property as low density residential, and the applicant is requesting to change that to medium density residential. Sorry, again, repeating a little bit. This is the second phase of the project. The first phase is directly to the north and was rezoned by the council in 2021. And change slide, please. So the Sugar House Master Plan is the general plan applicable to this site, and it designates this site as low density residential, but the plan provides location criteria for medium density residential land uses. I'm not going to take the time to read them, but there they are, straight from the plan, and we found that this request does meet that criteria. Okay, change slide, please. And then here are just a few photos from the site. Change slide again, please. Here's another picture. Change slide again. Have some context photos. Let's change slide again. And here are some renderings of the proposed project. So this project would put 8 townhomes on this site and 20 townhomes on the phase 1 site, so 28 townhomes total. The project received plan development approval from the Planning Commission that is conditioned on approval of these rezone requests. Change slide. And then here's a site plan provided by the applicant, and then that bit highlighted in yellow is the area we're talking about today. Change slide again. Okay, so what would RMF 35 change? So a few things. So in R1 7000, there's only a few types of housing that are allowed to be built. So single family homes, ADUs, and small group homes. RMF 35 allows additional housing types such as duplexes, townhomes, multifamily, and assisted living facilities. Building height is a little bit taller, 35 feet in RMF 35 compared to 28 in R17. And then development standards are different. These are not all of them. There's just 2 I'm going to highlight here. So RMF 35 has more permissive side yard and lot coverage requirements than R17, but it also has a 10-foot wide landscape buffer requirement when abutting a single family district. Okay, change slide. So I already talked about the Sugar House Master Plan. The proposal is also supported by goals in Plan Salt Lake and Housing SLC that encourage infill development of underutilized land and additional density near transit investment corridors. Change slide. So a Planning Commission hearing was held on October 25th, 2023. We had 5 emailed comments, 3 were in opposition, 2 in support, and there were no in-person comments. And the PC voted unanimously to forward a positive recommendation. And change slide. I believe that's it. Yep, that is it.
Thank you. Council members, any questions, comments, concerns? All right, the petitioner would like to address us. You don't have to. It's your moment to shine, though.
Ladies and gentlemen of the City Council, thank you so much for your time. In the slides, in addition to the information that was given, the zoning surrounding it is R1 7000. However, there are no individual residential homes in that zone. They're all multifamily, so everything to the south of it is multifamily. We canvassed the neighborhood, walked door to door, and most of the homeowners in that area were rentals. We do not want to deliver a rental product to the city. The city has enough of that. We want to deliver a product that's for sale, that's somewhat affordable. Our intent of the project is to do seller financing on the project, and we think that it's a great addition to Salt Lake City's housing stock.
Thank you. Council members, questions?
How does this fit into our affordable housing initiative? I'm maybe asking planning or Darren, because I know Darren
as the local expert, Councilmember Mono.
My understanding is this is not proposed as an affordable housing incentive project.
Correct. We're not asking for that.
I would love it if you'd look at that. It's obviously, I mean, I think both would be allowed both in the current zone, but in the proposed zone if approved. But it would, I just know the RMF 35 zone to be pretty restrictive in terms of density and the number of units that can be built. And with the affordable housing incentives, some would need to be sold at an affordable rate, but only a certain percentage of them, and you could do a lot more. And that to the goals of affordable housing, especially affordable home ownership, the threshold to be allowed to do that increased density is much easier to reach for sale products. That's one of our big discussion points, and we made that quite a bit easier. So I know that would be redesigning and rethinking of your site plan, but it could be a really good opportunity, both for the development, but also for the community to have maybe slightly smaller, but more dense and more units that can be sold at an even lower price.
And the affordable housing side of the house, if it's for sale, it was at 100% AMI, vice 80% AMI for the
I don't remember exactly for that zone. Staff could probably help us remember, but it's much easier to reach.
For the single family, yeah. Because I think we put that at 100% AMI.
We made it much easier to reach if it's a for sale product.
For sale product.
I'm not necessarily interested in redesigning my project, but would love to have about creating a few units that would meet that mark, but not reducing their size. That to me is not affordable. That's smaller. So I'm happy to have that conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? All right. You've done the impossible. You've rendered us speechless and ahead of schedule. Thank you. All right. Next is a resolution authorizing the Salt Lake County Housing Authority to operate within Salt Lake City for the deeply affordable housing development 44 North Apartments. Coming to the table are Ben Lutke, Council Policy Analyst Tony Milner, Heather Royal, Janice Kimball, and Sean McMillan.
I've got a quick introduction, Madam Chair. The resolution before the council is required by HUD regulations for the legislative body to authorize a housing authority from another jurisdiction to operate inside of the city limits. The authority is specific to this one development and then ongoing tenant assistance for those future tenants. The development would be located at 44 North, 1000 West. To help orient you, this is next to Madsen Park, which is between North Temple and the Folsom Trail. It would be permanent supportive housing with on-site services. Tenants would be referred through First Step House, and the project has secured full funding. It has also completed the transit station area process through the planning division. In the packet, you'll see a project summary document with many more details, as well as some renderings of what it would look like. I'll turn it over to Tony and the project partners for some more details.
Great, thanks, Ben. Again, this process, this resolution we're looking for is because it's a HUD requirement. So the HUD does define housing authority jurisdictions in the areas in which the public housing authorities has authority to, under state and local law, to administer programs. The same regulations apply to project-based voucher programs and other housing authority activities, and that is 24 CFR 982.4 and 983.2. Housing Connect requires the authorization of the governing body of Salt Lake City to prepare and carry out and operate projects that provide for the acquisition, construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, improvement, extension, alteration, or repair of any project within Salt Lake City boundaries. They are also required to get and seek and secure the approval from the other jurisdiction. In this case, that would be the Housing Authority for Salt Lake City. They have already gone ahead and gotten that authorization from the Housing Authority for Salt Lake City as well. This project aligns with the goals of the city's moderate income housing plan, referred to as Housing SLC 2023 through 2027, to increase deeply affordable housing. Our goal for the next 5 years is a minimum of 2,000 units of deeply affordable. And this project will help advance housing affordability goals for the city overall and provide increased housing options for the residents of Fair Park neighborhood. Again, the First Step House, this is First Step House and Housing Connect are proposing new permanent supportive housing complex at the address and will create 67 units of deeply affordable, low barrier housing for disabled individuals experiencing homelessness and chronic homelessness. Tenants will have incomes at or below 35% AMI and will meet the criteria for disability, including behavioral health conditions. A subset of residents will be medically frail. First Step House will provide optional case management and supportive services to the residents on site, and these services will be 24 hours at the site. The project sits on a 0.33 acre site and has the by right high density zoning. The project has received TSA zoning approved and is eligible to proceed with the building permit. And as of note, just a little other highlights. The project is located near 2 track stops with frequent bus stops along North Temple. Location will allow convenient and easy access to Salt Lake City's downtown area. The project is in the North Temple RDA project area and will benefit from ample public and private investments in the area. The project will be fully electric and the landlord will pay for all the utilities, including internet. The project will be built to a high quality standard and will be Enterprise Green Communities certified. The appliances will also all be Energy Star rated. The management of the programs of the property will be very similar to the other properties managed by First Step House. and they are looking for completion and leasing up in 2026. And with that, we look for any questions that you have. And again, we have the developers here to answer anything specifically.
Council members? Councilmember Mono.
I just have had the opportunity to tour First Step House. Your property's in Central City, and I'm blown away with the work that you're doing, and so I'm really excited to see you expanding your operations. Thank you for giving me that time and showing me what you're doing. For those of you that haven't had a tour, they'll let me speak for you, but services first and then housing, which is something that we don't see a lot. And so and when we talk about permanent supportive housing, deeply affordable, and housing that is needed for people that are chronically homeless and may have mental health conditions as well, this is exactly the type of thing we're asking for. So I'm really excited to see that you're expanding. Keep building more of that. This is the type of housing that affects the things that we see on the streets and the people that are unable to attain housing other ways. So I'm very, very supportive of this.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pui?
I obviously this it's good to see the loss of a naturally affordable house right now and replaced with something that is also affordable to the community and for those the housing that we see in the area is not necessarily affordable so it's good to see that, and I'm looking forward to working with the future neighbors to bring some more life to Madsen Park as well, and hopefully making that park more accessible for everybody and a good amenity for everybody, even your future tenants. So I'm very excited for that and to bring some life to that part of town. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dugan?
Thank you. And I just kind of echo Councilmember Mono and Bowie said, when I saw First Step House, and I know John very well, very impressive work, very impressive product, and very impressive services. And I was very excited about this. So I know it will do well because of your leadership and the quality work that you guys perform. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? I'll go ahead and be a little bit of a wet blanket. This services are amazing. The project is amazing. This is an inward point to speak. We are now putting more deeply affordable housing in the same 1 mile square radius. This housing will be directly next to an unchecked homelessness crisis on the Folsom Corridor Trail. Madsen Park is intermittently unusable because of that influence, which will not contribute to the likelihood of success for residents here. If we're allowing this, we're going to have to be very structural in other investments. Geographical equity in distributing these units is still needed beyond just an affordable housing incentive level. We cannot continue to put everyone here. We are going to create a scenario along North Temple where you can either afford $3,000 a month rent or you can afford no rent and are relying on subsidies. And that is not a healthy community. Those are not schools that are well supported. Those are not grocery stores that function well. This is not good community planning. And we need to be careful and more strategic. This is not a reflection on your project or on the service provision. I am thrilled to have your caliber of services. This is a pattern that we are turning a blind eye to in the North Temple area that we have to be introspective around. So I'm the wet blanket. I'm at peace with that. So anything else? All right, thank you. We will move on then to the city's annual financial audit. Michael Michelson from Aid Bailey, Paul Skeen, and Mary Beth Thompson will join us at the table. I defaulted to this chair.
Good afternoon, Council. Every year we do 3 audits. We went through the RDA audit with the board back in January, and this is the city's financial audit as well as the single audit. Paul Skeen and Mike Mickelson will be going over the findings in the audit.
Appreciate the chance to be here, and I'd like to commend council on being a few minutes ahead of schedule. I don't know that I've seen that happen, and I think I almost got beat up by Mary Beth. She's like, "You were late," and I was like, "I was 7 minutes early," and then you said that we're up. So thank you for putting my life in jeopardy with Mary Beth. Not really, but that's right. There's a buffer. I'm safe. But appreciate the opportunity to be here and report on the results of our audit. Just by way of introduction, Paul Skeen, I'm the audit partner over the main financial statement audit. Mike Mickelson takes care of the RDA and the compliance testing, and he'll talk about the compliance testing. But just wanted to, or a few new faces on council, so go through a few things that we're required to share with the governing body, and then talk through timeline, the deliverables aside from the ones that we're reporting on today, and give a general overview of our reporting on the audit. And then Mike will talk about, as I mentioned, the compliance testing and results that we have. So the first and most important thing is to confirm that we are independent of the city. We're regulated by the AICPA ethics standards and meet all of the requirements for that. There are different responsibilities. As the auditors, our responsibility really lies in the reports that you get. And I mean that specifically within the 200 and however many pages of the annual comprehensive financial report. About 3 of those pages belong to us as the auditors. The rest belongs to management, and they're responsible for preparing those in a way that's consistent with accounting standards and that materially reflect the operations and assets and liabilities of the city. And then as council, you have the responsibility to oversee it. So even though we spend a significant amount of time with Mary Beth and Russ and the others that work on the audit, we work for you. We're employed by you, and we report to you. You're all very grateful that we don't spend the amount of time with you that we spend with the finance team, though we're delightful people, I assure you. Talking about the timing and scope of the audit, we're here in January. Our audit, or February, I haven't emotionally adjusted to that yet. Our audit actually begins in late May, early June in the planning phases. And we do everything we can to line things up. It's a risk-based approach, so we go through fresh each year and identify if there are any changes in critical personnel or accounting policies or entity structure, and design an audit plan that allows us to address those risks. As we commence into the actual audit, there are several deliverables that we have, and I'm going to talk just high level what those are, the separate audits that we do, and then the timetable, the standard timetable. So the first audit that we typically issue is the airport, and that's August-September timeframe that we're doing the work on that. We do a separate audit for the 4 funds within the Department of Utilities. That work is typically performed in October into early November. We do a separate audit for the library, and that's typically October, November timeframe as well. We mentioned the RDA, which has already been reported on. We now do a separate audit for the DEA task force, and that one's a very small tuck-in that typically we do in October, November. And then we have the overall financial audit that is performed really from September through the end of December. And then the compliance audit that Mike will report on is November, December. So we're engaged in the audit process really from the middle of May until we issue in December on the main annual comprehensive financial report. Now this year was, I'm sure that you've heard, I don't know if workday is a curse word or if it's accepted now, but that had a significant impact on this year's audit. And we knew it would, and we planned our audit accordingly and tested things that would typically become a higher risk in a new implementation of an ERP system. The thing that you've probably heard and felt is that this is an extremely intense endeavor by the finance team. And our hats off to them for doing their day job, implementing a new ERP, and dealing with us as auditors, and candidly doing all, from our perspective, very well. One of the things that becomes necessary, and we've talked about this for those that have been part of the council before, we've talked about this, that in order to make the statutory deadline of December 31st, we have to start auditing procedures before the finance team is completely done closing the books and reconciling all accounts. And we've got enough of a collaborative relationship that we know the areas that are going to be done first, and so we kind of attack those first. Attack's a terrible word to use, I apologize. We spend our resources on auditing those areas first and working our way through it. Now, in the process of that, there are some times that we're testing things before they're completely reconciled, and some entries need to be made that we deem audit entries. And we had a few of those this year. Nothing that we think is systemic or indicative of major failures, but kind of inherent in the process. One of the things that, as a result of Workday, everything got pushed back a little bit, and there was a pretty intense crunch the last half of December to make sure that we got the audit out on time. And that was the finance team, our audit teams, everyone felt that pretty intensely. And so our plan this next year, and I've talked to Mary Beth and Russ about this, is to have an all-hands meeting with each of those components that I mentioned, because each one, if they miss their timetable, it creates a lot of, the stopgap is the finance team. And so we're going to make sure that there's clear communication on when each of those deliverables need to be completed and audits issued in order to avoid a little bit of the crunch that made for a less than Merry Christmas this year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to talk about some of the compliance areas, and then we'll field any questions that you have.
Thanks, Paul. So our compliance reports bear the same report date as the auditor's report on the financial statements. We issued a separate deliverable with those compliance reports. There are 3 reports in that package. So the audits that Paul performs are done under government auditing standards. There's a statutory requirement in the state of Utah that all governments, when they're audited, the auditors follow a second set of auditing standards called government auditing standards. We also follow those standards when a single audit or a compliance audit is performed. But there is a report that's issued as a result of government auditing standards that's not in the ACFR, but it's in the second deliverable that I'm discussing now. So that's the first report in that deliverable. That report deals with internal controls related to financial reporting and compliance issues that relate specifically to financial reporting. There was one item reported in that report that Paul's already discussed. And so the financial statement audit team, as a result of their audit procedures, issued a finding that they termed a material weakness in internal control related to those reconciliations that were still happening while they were doing their audit procedures. And so next year, and in management's response, they fully intend to have that done sooner because they won't have the ERP implementation on top of everything else they're doing. So that's the first compliance report. There were no instances of non-compliance related to financial reporting. The second report in that other deliverable relates to state compliance. Our state auditor's office creates a guide every year for auditors to follow with the areas that they're concerned about that they want us to audit in local governments. And so we followed that guide and issued a state compliance report. We had 2 findings from that this year. And that's the corrective action plan. So the first one dealt with 2 instances of minutes that weren't posted to the Transparent Utah website within 3 days of the approval. And so management has, in the corrective action plan, described how they're going to fix that and make sure that that doesn't happen again. The other instance of noncompliance, and we called both of these immaterial instances, so they did not result in a modification of our state compliance report. Our state compliance report says that the city is in material compliance with state statutes, but these are both immaterial instances that need to be brought to your attention, so you're aware of them too. The other one was the city saved too much money. The state audit, or actually it's state statute does not let cities have a fund balance that exceeds 30% or 35% of the total revenue of the general fund. And so I'm sure there will be, or there already have been, budget discussions on how to take care of that issue going forward. But that probably resulted again from the time that was spent on ERP and probably less time being spent on a daily basis making sure that the transactions occurred in a way that fund balance wasn't too high, that ending fund balance. So those are the two items we had in the state compliance report. The final report relates to the audit we do of the federal funding. And the city had, I want to say, $61 million in federal funding this year because the airport, still under construction, has a lot of $112 million. I was off by half, almost. But there's still a lot of construction going on at the airport and a lot of federal money there, among other things. So there's still a lot of COVID money, COVID funds that are being used by local governments too. In the audit of the federal funds, we can't audit all $112 million. That's made up of 5 or 6 pages of different programs that comes to the city in. So the guidance in performing a single audit from OMB has a risk-based approach. And so we divide the different programs into type A and type B programs, and then we assess the risk of those, and we're required to audit all high-risk type A's. And then if there are low-risk type A's, we have to substitute those with high-risk B, so that we're hitting different levels of programs at different materiality points. So we do that risk assessment, and we came up with the programs to audit this year, and those programs are listed in the summary of our audit results in that package. On page 15, I don't know if you have them up. Based by your reactions, I don't think you do, and that's fine. It's fine if you don't. I mean, this is not exciting stuff. Paul's was much more exciting. But those 3 major programs that we audited this year were the Airport Improvement Program, the Emergency Rental Assistance, and the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund. So those ended up being either the high-risk well, those were all high risk this year. In a year where they are not all high risk, sometimes we have to pull programs to get to a certain threshold of coverage. But the volume of money going through the airport makes that a little bit higher risk. And the emergency rental assistance being a COVID-related program that's new, there's risks surrounding that. And then the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund, the federal government has said this is high risk and all auditors need to audit that. So we were directed to audit that as a result. But so those are the programs that we chose through that risk-based approach. We performed our compliance testing and our testing of internal control related to that, and we issued the related report. So we don't test internal controls at the point to issue an opinion on operating effectiveness of those internal controls, but we do test them to the point that we issue any findings that we have over internal controls and then have to give assurance in our opinion that we've at least discovered the material issues, because that's the threshold that we have to plan our procedures to, is to catch anything material. And then we report on compliance as well. So we do procedures that are procedures designed both to test internal controls and to test on compliance related to the federal regulations on that money that you receive. And there's a lot of them, and so people inside the city have to be aware of those and up to speed on those to be able to establish the controls over those. We only had one finding in the federal audit this year, or that audit of the federal funds. There was one of the quarterly reports that we tested related to the COVID-19 Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund that was, we have to test the underlying documentation that goes into those reports. So the amount in the report differed from the amount of the underlying documentation. Now, before we even came in to do our audit, the city's controls had caught that and corrected the subsequent report, subsequent quarterly report. So there was a report for the quarter ended June 30, and then another report for the quarter ended September 30, where the correction was made when we came in and did our audit procedures in October, November, and December. But because that report was misstated originally, we were required to report that as a finding. That was attributed to, again, the reconciliations that were behind because of the ERP implementation, and that instance that we don't expect to continue next year and that management has addressed in their corrective action plan. So this document gets filed with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. It was filed last week with management's corrective action plan. So management is required to say how they will address those findings going forward, name a person that's going to be responsible for that, and that was filed with this document. So that audit is complete, and management is working towards remediating those findings that we had this year. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Council members. Can I ask a question on the 30%? Because I have a real hard time thinking saving too much money is a problem. So I know we've got our state statutes that, limit how much we can have, but I was reading that Moody's is actually increasing their threshold for what reserves a municipality has to have on hand in order to maintain a bond rating. So that 30%, is that a hard and fast rule? Is this a best practice that might be evolving that actually isn't something that's bad?
So currently it is set in state statute. So it's a law in the state of Utah that cities cannot have, and I misspoke, it's 35%.
Okay, that's what I was under the impression of too, right? Like 35 is our threshold, but that's also what Moody's is going to be asking for, from what I read.
I think Moody's is a little bit higher, but what Moody's is doing moving forward is they are doing it based on the entire city, not just the general fund portion.
Thank you.
And
That's a
this
good
is only the general fund portion of fund balance. Not the entire city. The entire city for Moody's will be about 45%, and they're going to look, which is different, right? They've always looked at each fund separately. Now they're combining and looking at holistically for the entire city.
So that'll include all of our
Enterprise
like
and internal service funds.
Okay.
Correct.
And with that calculation, are we at the place where Moody's?
We're going to talk about that on the 20th of February when we do our risk assessment.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, I went from audit to risk assessment.
That's okay. The only other thing I was going to point out was the legislature would be the people to change that if need be. And so there could be lobbying or some sort of conversation there, but that's the level it would have to be changed at.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, thank you so much. And you gave us 6 minutes back. We get to be ahead of schedule for the next person and cause panic for them. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
All right, so next up, 6 minutes early, is budget amendment number 3 talk with Ben Lutke. Mary Beth gets to stay here with us. Lisa Hunt and Greg Cleary will be joining us.
There is a tentative vote scheduled tonight for budget amendment number 3. So if the council wants specific items to be voted on separately, please let me know. We'll update the motion sheet. There are 3 items left. There is the downtown parking pay station replacements. There is a request for $500,000 in overtime for the police department, and a follow-up item from the last annual budget to release $500,000 from a holding account for the temporary sanctioned campground operations. And I'll walk through each of those 3 quickly. I'll start with the downtown parking pay stations. As a reminder, it's a request for $136,000, which is a partial first-year payment, and there would be 6 additional full-year payments through fiscal year 2030. The council had asked several questions at the last briefing. Those full responses are on page 1 and continue into page 2 of the staff report. I can run through those, some highlights. There's also 2 new attachments. Attachment 3 is an executive summary presentation of the downtown parking meters analysis. And the full report of that analysis is attachment 4. The presentation is much shorter and it hits on the main points. There are several policy topics that the council may be interested in requesting a separate briefing to specifically talk about what the parking analysis study concluded and recommended. The highlights from the council's questions are the parking SLC mobile app. It would continue to be used under the proposed meter replacements. And an information campaign over multiple months would be done in person and online to notify the public, downtown businesses, and other organizations about the change in the physical meters. The new stations have capabilities that the current ones do not, and these are at no additional cost, such as the ability to have a variable rate schedule. So instead of having the same cost per hour throughout the day at all locations, it could go up or down at different times of day and different days of the week. It would also have the ability to have shorter or longer periods of paying for a parking spot, and the option for a vendor zone, such as a food truck, if it wanted to occupy that space for an amount of time. It can also do advertising, whether public service announcements or advertising that would be paid by a business or another entity, as well as regional information, maps, locations nearby. You could pay parking citations at the kiosk instead of going to a website. And it could also be integrated with the Utah Transit Authority's passes. That would require additional work. There are additional capabilities that would cost more, including pollution sensors and upgrading the meters for electric vehicle charging. One of the questions I think it was Councilmember Pui asked is how many people are paying on the app versus paying with a card physically at the meter. And that varies by location. On average, it's about half. The vast majority of the meters fell within 41% to 60% as the range of people paying. So given that percentage, that's why keeping the physical meters 2 per block face was recommended, because there's still quite a few people using them instead of the app. In the parking meter study, they have a breakout by location, so you can see some locations have more app usage for payment than others. I think that's it for the highlights. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Councilmember Lopez Chavez.
Gosh, I think these parking meters do everything. That's pretty great, Ben. I'd like to know what the variable costs are for all these increases. I heard advertising. I heard all these different changes that our current parking meters don't do. So I'd like to know how much that variable cost will be to have that increase and change in this apparatus.
I don't have that now.
Can I actually, piggybacking on this, reiterate the council's previous request that we get a briefing about this and not just answers to questions in the meeting? I think there's a lot of evolving questions and interaction the council would like to do, and I think it's really important that we get the opportunity to do that. Small groups are fine, I think, for that, or if we want to structure it differently, I'm open to that.
And if I may add, please, Chair, I'm curious to see what potential revenue could be created for different districts where there's high utility. I think something, and I'm coming into the conversation a little late. Unfortunately, I was not a part of this council when the original briefings or this introduction, if there was any prior. Okay, well, I'd like to know any potentials for outdoor advertising on the or art displays on these meters. I've seen in different meters in other cities that utilize the space in a way that's pretty genius, actually. So I'd like to know if there's a potential to increase revenue for our city in other ways beyond just the parking utility itself. And then I'd like to ask also if our innovation team was involved. I think with a lot of apparatuses and services that cities supply all across America, I've seen that, again, these meters are used in a way to create digital, to bridge the digital divide, provide Wi-Fi, charging stations. I think there's just a lot more utility. So as we look to update our infrastructure, especially in the downtown, I'd like to see these options. I'd at least like to know that we're investing in the best utilities possible for our growing city.
Yeah, and I have questions about the resilience and the ability to withstand trauma, both from our weather and from the social impacts, to make sure we're not giving ourselves an unmanageable maintenance bill too. Councilmember Pui?
Madam Chair, I think that I'm piggybacking again on all of you, but it was mentioned last time, and I guess I will reiterate that we'll love some meetings about this. That these variable charges will probably require some policy discussions. I will like to say that, or explore the possibility to maybe explore a connection between red day air quality days, like when the air is the worst, and maybe the fee is a little higher. To try to encourage some different behaviors. But, but again, this is a policy discussion that I think it needs to be somehow attendant with this. And I would love if we have the possibility for some input on this matter.
Councilmember Young.
So I have a question. This is already included in Budget Amendment 3. So do we have an existing contract or service provider, or are we without that and just hoping until something gets approved? I'm just trying to determine where the budget is related to our...
Jorge Chamorro is coming to the rescue.
Thank you for all the questions. Jorge Chamorro from Public Services here. To answer the latest question, we do have a contract, an ongoing contract with a provider for the product installed on the street, as well as the back-end management system. It is very limited in capacity because of the old nature of the current pay stations, hence the need to replace them. I would also like to add that all of the proposed policy changes we will have the capacity to implement many of those based on the policy discussions that you will have. The immediate need is to replace an aging product that is costing us some money keeping it running. The sooner we can replace that, the sooner we can initiate conversations about policy, because the capability of that product is expanding exponentially. It will allow for advertisement on the screens, but we don't have a method right now to say how is that going to operate? Who will apply for it, right? How much is the city going to charge for per hit or per display, right? We don't have that yet. However, what I can tell you is that the capability exists. So if you are hoping to make a decision based on whether or not this product is going to be able to implement those policy changes, the answer is yes, it will. And the additional cost, we will have an ongoing cost to maintain this software in the back end, but we will love to utilize it at its full potential, which is advertising, additional sensors, displaying information, all of that we currently don't have. But we definitely welcome the opportunity to expand what we can accomplish with that new product.
So can I follow up?
Okay.
So now I may be more confused, so I apologize. So in terms of the additional funding, it would go to an existing contractual, no, okay.
Yeah.
Not an existing.
No,
Something
we're
new.
basically replacing the kiosk that you see right now on the street. It will be replaced with a brand new one.
Got it. Okay. And so I guess because it sounds like that there are also some questions about maybe the ongoing solutions in that space. When we move forward, how long is the standard contract or this particular contract related to the city's procurement process?
Okay, so the vendor that we will be contracting with would be responsible for the installation, the product installation, and then the ongoing support and software backend for us. And that contract starts at 5 years with potential of renewing.
Okay. And that's helpful. I think one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is that in listening to my fellow council members and hearing that there is some additional interest in what the city's solution is, I guess wondering about the length of that 5 years and the flexibility of the contract itself to be able to accommodate additional policy changes as the council considers it. Or if it's a no, if we adopt this, our next bite at the apple, if you will, would not be until after 5 years or potentially plus 2 years, depending on the actions.
Yeah, it feels like we'd be asked to retrofit policy to a commitment that we're making in advance of asking the policy questions in the appropriate order.
My question. Is that accurate?
So I think one of the things that you need to know is that these pay stations have a useful life of 10 years. That's the reason we're doing a 7-year lease on these. So the vendor on the back end may be different than this, but the pay stations themselves have a useful life of 10 years. And I think that was maybe getting to some of your point is what the useful life of these are, when we're going to have to go back out for new kiosks. The pay stations we have right now are older than 10 years, just to give you an FYI.
Councilmember Dugan?
I think Councilmember Young's question about signing a contract and then not being able to change some of the features that we want on that contract until 5 years. And is that kind of like we don't want to be, and I think I know the answer here, but these contracts, when you have the baseline, you can always adjust what you want in the contract as you go. But is there additional cost to make those changes to that contract instead of waiting for 5 years? I'm kind of adding to your question.
Okay, that is a little bit clearer. Without knowing exactly and specifically what would you like to see these machines do, I can tell you that some of the discussions that you are having will be covered with the contract that we could potentially engage with this vendor. So from the get-go, the advertising, it's offered, again, at the base cost that we're already paying for the operation of the machines, right? There is no additional cost for that. But without knowing exactly, what you all would like to see these machines do, I don't know if that is included in the base software support, if I may.
Councilmember Pui?
Thank you. I know that this is not what you guys the administration is trying to do, but it feels to me personally that I'm being placed on a situation where I need to vote for this because of, they're not working correctly. They're costing us a lot of money to maintain, but they're not giving the opportunity to us to learn more and to actually ask questions. And I personally don't like to be placed in a position where I'm supposed to vote for some money and to approve a contract when I don't have the opportunity to give some feedback. You know, and I understand that there are limitations and there is a division here as required, but I would love to have that opportunity. I personally don't feel at this moment ready to vote for that amendment tonight. Because there is a lot of questions, and I support it, and you probably heard from this body, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, that we are excited for the changes. So there is a general sentiment that we're moving in the same direction, but I think the opportunity to have some questions asked and get some feedback will go a long way in this process.
Thank you, Councilmember Puig, Councilmember Mono, and you'll probably be the last unless there's a burning question.
Okay, so two sides of the discussion, right? One, the current stations are past their useful life. Is that true? Okay. And then the second one I think is this the only option? There's got to be more than one vendor that makes these, or is this like?
I'm going to answer this question and just an additional comment. The process of replacing these pay stations follows the traditional equipment replacement process that the city follows. RFP, evaluating all of the interested parties that are willing to offer this product to us. And just like any other equipment, we evaluate the proposals and we made a decision. So this is, I understand the interest to add additional features to this, but we are coming from the point of we need to replace a piece of equipment that gives you the opportunity to have additional features, additional policy discussions in the near future. So then the answer concretely is yes, there were other vendors that proposed other products. The committee that was put together decided that this is in the best interest of the city to go with this one.
And I think for me, understanding the RFP is completely administrative, but this feels like a significant change. We're not just going from parking meter to parking meter. We're going from parking meter to a new paradigm of technology in the city that could either help us grow to our shared vision of what a smart city is, or maybe not completely. So for me, I think that's where it is. I'm not trying to dictate the terms of any RFP or any committee. I think that absolutely is what it should be. And so I think the policy questions for us are around taking this opportunity of the aging infrastructure to facilitate a greater move towards the smart city. And so I think that's the nature. No one has any problems with the RFP or the process or your ability. This just feels like not a typical pivot.
And it's within our role to not vote for a budget amendment as well, right? So it is, if not, then we are just placed in a situation where we just need to do what is our role than just approving something. Yeah.
So I really would love to schedule, and council scheduling can maybe get together so we can get to a place where everyone has been able to ask all the multitude of questions that they have so that we can do our job with fidelity. Thank you all so much. We will move on now to the ordinance regarding landscaping and buffers.
Sorry, there are two other things that we just need to know if we should put on the motion sheet separately. It sounds like there definitely needs to be a separate motion for the parking meters. Yep. Noted.
$500,000 that we've already allocated just needs to be released so that we can pay for the sanctioned parking. Any questions, concerns, or comments on that?
And then the other is police overtime.
And the police overtime.
I know I had some questions about that. My questions have been solved, so I'm okay with that.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, tried to jump ahead too fast. All right, so then now we will go to the landscaping and buffers chapter text amendment follow-up. Jennifer Bruno will introduce this, and Nanette Larson is joining us. They refused to put your name in here for us today.
Sorry, I was just a surprise guest.
We're thrilled to have you nonetheless.
Thanks, Madam Chair. This is just a follow-up discussion based on the council's conversation in December. There were several proposed areas of the proposal that the council was asking additional questions about and wondering if there could be some changes. And so planning has outlined those potential changes in a memo. Each of those items, it might help to straw poll so that they know what to include in a potential revised ordinance. So as we go through each of these changes, it would be helpful to have some feedback from the council if you support their recommendation. In many cases, they're making recommendations of, you know, change it this way, change it that way. So we can flag those when we get there. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, council. I did prepare slides and a presentation of these proposed modifications, as Jennifer was explaining, related to the briefing that we had in December. If you would like to go through each proposed modification, I do have a table at the end that kind of outlines the modifications and what staff's recommendation is and what action needs to be taken.
Council, do you one by one or? Table? All right.
To the table? Okay.
Yes.
So it is the last slide of the presentation. Let's actually go to the slide just before this table. There was one last modification. We did update the definition of turf in the landscaping chapter. This was done after our latest conversation with public utilities. We found that referring to the drought-tolerant plant list as grasses that are exempted from the definition of turf is more beneficial for both divisions' purposes. And we went away from relying on generic terms like adaptive or native grass species as exempted from the definition of turf, just so the council's aware. And let's go to the table on the next slide. So on this table, it goes over each item that council had asked staff to address. Underneath is whether changes were made to the ordinance as a response to council's recommendations or if additional direction is needed for modifications to the chapter. And then on the right-hand side are staff's recommendations.
Councilmember Mono?
Ben.
Go ahead. I nodded.
I appreciate the first one. I'm comfortable with 15. I think that's a good number. So for me, that feels like the appropriate place. Perimeter landscaping, I think 8 feet wide makes sense, but in the ordinance, does it allow for the 2-foot overhang? So the stall could be actually 2 feet shorter because the nose of the car can overhang the curb a couple feet. Do you know if that's allowed or not?
That is allowed in our parking chapter. The minimum 8 feet wide. So all of the interior landscaping areas need to be the length of the adjoining parking stall. So that would take into account. We wouldn't have like interior landscaping sticking out into a drive aisle. So this 8 foot wide is the width, not necessarily the length of the interior
That's
landscaping.
the perimeter landscaping that's 8 feet wide though, right? Or is there?
It would be interior and perimeter would be.
Okay, so I think my question is specific to the perimeter landscaping. When there's 8 feet of landscaping around the exterior, the outside of the parking lot, but I have cars parking up against that 8 feet landscaping, am I allowed to reduce my parking stall by 2 feet so that because the nose of the car can actually overhang the curb a little bit? Does that question make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure if we actually have that built in terms of the landscaping. We can look at the parking chapter to see if the overhang and like what is included in terms of the perimeter.
I would appreciate that. I think 8 feet, if that's what the urban forester says is needed for the tree, if a tree is in the middle of an 8 foot thing, that's 4 feet in from the curb. So I think the 2 foot overhang of the car would not hit the tree. So I would, but I think that gives a little more flexibility so you actually have a smaller parking lot, less asphalt.
So
we can certainly look into that and
Madam Chair, Madam Chair, I understand the concept here, and we're getting into the engineering weeds here. I also just worry about smaller cars that don't have that front bumper doesn't go use that 2 extra feet, because you have a car that goes up to that thing, not 2 extra feet for the length of the stall. That would be my only concern, is smaller cars without a clearance to cover the curb to go that 2 extra feet. Maybe the shorter, maybe that plays out, but
Like
just,
shorter cars?
no, just so that they because they're too low to make that 2-foot clearance.
But it's not 2 feet. It's only 6 inches.
No, but
curb.
you said, but I know 6 inches, but some cars can't make that 2 inches. It's 6 inches, so they're not going to have that 2 feet extra.
I see.
Just look at it some more.
It is something that happens in a lot of ordinances that allows the curb overhang to be so that your parking spot, it actually would, for the purposes of this ordinance, it would improve that because the overall asphalt area gets smaller, but it also doesn't impede the ability to make your parking lot fit. It doesn't reduce the landscaping, it reduces the asphalt, if that makes sense, and still allows your dimensions to work. But
Okay, anything else?
Did I hear a straw poll on item number 1? Just checking. The 15 stall threshold. Okay, sorry, just to. And then the perimeter landscaping, it sounds like that will be kind of a thing that maybe you can look into and work on.
With the overhang,
Great.
yes.
But just for clarification, comfortable with the 8-foot width?
I'm comfortable with 8-foot width if the 2-foot overhang is allowed.
Great.
I think that's a perfect.
And then the next item is a clarification of the interior lot landscaping.
It says clarified. What does that mean?
So that was a recommendation recommended to adjust the size of the interior parking lot landscaping so it was consistent with the size of a parking stall.
And that proposed language is in the staff report on the bottom of page 1. It's the black language.
And changes were made to that clarification.
Right. Perfect.
So are you okay with that language? Great. Accessibility, they're not recommending changes. They've kind of answered the question that they believe the overall walking distance will be minimal and a walkway is required in lots with 25 or more stalls. Okay.
Straw polls.
Are we straw polling all of these individually?
Yes. I think the goal is to, because then they need to know what to put in the ordinance that's before for your adoption on the 20th.
Okay, I say yes on all those. I don't know which ones we.
Okay. If you wanted to do them as a batch, that's even better.
Does anyone have any that they are dissenting to? Let's do that.
I do need some clarification, and it will, maybe show that I need to pay a little more attention sometimes. But the 30, the changes on the 35%, requirement. I guess there is not necessarily changes on that, but I'm trying to find my notes now. When you have multiple pieces of parking strip, divided by a sidewalk or a driveway, or another piece on the other side of the house, are those added up? So can you potentially landscape some of those full and then some of them not? So I have some neighbors in my district that have a corner one, a triangle in the middle, and it's very hard to get water, and they have placed just rocks, but they still have landscape in other pieces in other parts of their parking strip. And I'm trying to understand if that 30 some percent applies as an average of all the parking strips or as an individual parking strip, if that makes sense. Are you adding up all the pieces of parking strips, or are you?
So is it a cumulative average, or is it parcel by parcel?
Piece by piece.
I think it's applied to the whole lot area.
So you potentially could have, if you have a piece of parking strip that is not ideal for vegetation.
Or that's difficult to access, like you were saying.
Could you not have vegetation in that one piece, granted that you still meet the threshold of 35? 33. I was trying to 33%. I guess that's my question.
So I think the way it's written, and jump in if this isn't correct, but I think the way it's written is that each area, so there's one area of a park strip separated by a driveway, another area of a park strip. This area would be calculated on its own merits, and this area would be calculated on its own merits. I don't know that we thought about combining the two. I think on the flip side of that, part of the reason for that is we didn't want one of those areas just to be able to be completely hardscaped.
And I think that may be what I'm arguing, that maybe some areas it might need some language to make sure that it's not being abused, but I feel like that there has to be some of that. I can probably go around, for a couple hours and take photos of some of them that are almost impossible to landscape, and landscape will require water, and I struggle with that.
So I would agree with Councilmember Poit, just thinking about if it is like parcel by parcel or land strip by land strip, that could be a lot of infrastructure in terms of being able to establish water to access like each of those potentially. And I think at least, I will say my misinterpretation was that it was holistic to the property as opposed to individual subsections.
So it sounds like maybe that's another area you guys could investigate and return with language maybe to accommodate that.
Yeah, we'll clarify it that it's cumulative of all park strips that are joining the property.
So which one of that is these?
That actually wasn't on this particular list.
He's just innovating a totally new thing for you to work on right now.
But yeah, we can certainly look into
I do think it's worthy, though, while we have it open, to investigate that. On the list, is anyone dissenting to anything that's listed here before us? Can I take everyone's tacit response? Go ahead, okay, Councilmember Romano.
But not everything here is not everything is listed here, right? So are we saying just the things on this list?
These are the things we asked for additional clarification on. So it is not exhaustive, but these are the things that they've been assigned, that they took from our last meeting as their assignments.
I want to explore the tree canopy line a little bit deeper. So that's saying existing tree canopies or canopies at time of planting count as your landscape percentage. I think when we were discussing it before, we were saying maybe that can count for like half of your landscaping percentage, but we still want some ground cover. I don't know if we're all on the same page as that. But I think you really, like if you have a mature tree that exists, you could literally have no other plants in your whole yard. Is the tree canopy of the mature tree could be really huge. So
I want that tree in my yard.
What's that?
Whatever that tree is, I want it in my yard.
We all want that tree in our yard, but I think just because you have that tree, you could still have some. So maybe it's like of the 33%, 15%, half of it has to be actual ground cover. I don't know if that's good or bad. I think that was, and I think that was what I remember from our discussion last time, and maybe you've explored that and there's a reason why that's a bad idea, and I'd be interested in hearing that.
Any other feedback on this?
I know that was something that we had discussed at the briefing last time, was making a percentage of the tree canopy. The reason why, as staff, we had recommended that it's existing or at the time of planting is because some of those the mature trees, and there was an image that we included in the memo as well that was kind of an indication of a mature tree that is sufficient for mitigating the urban heat island effect, ensuring that the soils remain healthy and aren't, hardened like clay. But that is, if you don't think that it's sufficient and you still think that 50% of the tree canopy can count towards that 1/3 vegetation, we can make that modification. But this was just a recommendation from staff.
What was initially proposed was that the tree canopy at maturity was going to count.
Yes,
and so that was the existing tree
there.
And then a newly planted tree, which may take, who knows how many years to mature. So that was the adjustment that we went
let me
with.
understand this a little better. So it will apply to the percentage, let's say it's a new tree, but it might only be, you know, a 15% because it's a baby tree. So, and then I need to add another 15% of vegetation. When that tree keeps on growing and maybe covers, hopefully, the whole area, I wouldn't be required to keep that vegetation, that other 15% vegetation. Okay, that I'm comfortable with that, but you know, I'm learning a lot about this. And ultimately, the reason why, if I remember right, why we're requiring vegetation is for the urban heat island. So, and the tree will accomplish that. I know that some people like the vegetation. I personally do like, but it's also harder to grow trees under plants under trees. But yeah, that's interesting.
So does that solve the whole urban heat island effect if the tree, just because if it's like black, this picture has like black ground mulch,
if I may, I think
around it, and the tree's gonna shade it for some of the day, but not all of the day because of the angle of the sun. I don't know. I could be wrong though.
Councilwoman?
Oh, I was just going to add any central, something that we're trying to do is to promote cultivating and maintaining these trees. And I think that helps promote it, is that the understanding of this amendment. So I'm in favor of it. I think I've seen this where in my neighborhood, there are these aging trees, almost a century old, that are not being cared for. And as people xeriscape, they're not able to promote that well-being. So I think this helps accomplish that. I don't know if you've seen that in your neighborhood, but I do think this will help kind of bring our residents together so they can have that xeriscaping ability or try to get closer to more water conservation efforts in their gardening and landscaping, but to maintain that canopy. Yeah.
Nick, you're up. Did you have something to
I was just going to
say?
make a comment on that image because the reason why that was put in there is one, to show that's 100% tree canopy coverage over the sidewalk along that entire property. And I don't know that anyone's ever measured what the surface temperature is, but it's also near my house, and that's why I've been, so I'm super familiar with it, but it's not mine. But it's a noticeable difference in the heat island when it matters, which is during the really hot summer months.
All right, I don't feel strongly enough about it to ask for a change. I think it would be nice to still have some ground cover just because it looks nice and there's an aesthetic value to that. But if staff feels like this is okay and the rest of the council feels like that, I don't feel strongly enough to ask for a change. So,
Councilmember Wharton?
So, just to make sure I understand between the tree canopy and the park strip discussions, I want to make sure that that it's possible that that we could look at the whole person's yard and say they have a whole bunch of trees that are helping with the heat island effect and bringing that temperature down, but maybe they don't have other. It's not in the park strip because they aren't able to water or install the water equipment there. Is that what the changes address?
So wherever the tree canopy is where it would qualify as vegetation coverage. So if the tree is located in the park strip, then it would qualify as the 33% vegetation in the park strip. If it's located in the front yard, then it would qualify as the front yard vegetation.
Okay, I think that answers my question. And then the second one is just that in the purpose and intent statement of the ordinance, we previously had promote the prudent use of water, and I think that got taken out, and I think we should leave it in.
Councilmember Dugan?
Actually, I would say water conservation instead of prudent.
My question was more on the grandfathering of people that xeriscaped and natural scaped their lawns prior to the changes here, and that there's a grandfather clause that they're not have to update their lawn. Is that, I didn't catch that in the writing, so I just want to clarify that.
That's right. None of these changes will be retroactive. Yeah. If someone has Kentucky bluegrass in their front yard, they make no changes for 10 years, then it's still legal complying.
Okay, that's Thank you.
Or legal non-compliant.
Can that be triggered in some way? If there is something to encourage the changes, ultimately that is also not. We hope not to see Kentucky bluegrass on parking strips or in many places. So I wonder if there is some encouraging on that. But to Councilmember Dugan's point, I also would like to encourage some, and I know that seems hard to manage, but some grandfather in for people that have done some work, and I don't know how that process works. I mean, I worked on all of my yard with landscape, localscapes, which will qualify for most of these things, if not all of them. But some people have gone a little harder on the lack of vegetation, and I don't want us to start, punishing people for that, since probably the change overall is negligent, and holistically for the city. But that's a discussion that potentially we could have.
I think if I could just chime in, I think the ordinance is pretty clear that it's not retroactive, and so I think the challenge is probably more education based, and so not just for the people that have done the landscaping, but for the neighbors that often submit complaints about, right? So I think the education component is probably as key as.
To this point, though, when we've been doing the trees on the west side, the mayor's plan, you probably heard me talk about trees to ad nauseum, but we added funding to this to make sure that they had tools to educate when they planted the tree. So the council added to the administration some funding to, I wonder if there is something to do with that, is if we're going to implement this, maybe we can add some extra funding for education, if you think that could be useful, to make sure that there is somehow a campaign from the city to educate about the benefits.
Yeah, and updating the landscaping chapter is the first step. We are also looking at creating a website and a handbook that explains all of this in very simple terms, with recommendations on how to update your landscaping and comply with this chapter.
Cindy just sent me a message, which I think might be an important thing to clarify. If someone put something in their yard that was illegal, like artificial turf in their front yard, that was previously illegal, it would continue to be illegal and would be enforced on.
That's correct.
Okay, so.
Yes, and I also wanted to add to that if they completely hardscaped their yard with no plants, that was already illegal also. Right. So that would continue to be illegal and would not be grandfathered in. It is my.
Right, the concept of grandfathering.
You want, is that what the council wants to have? Because some things that were already legal and continue to be legal cannot be grandfathered in, right? Because they were never legal when they were put in.
Right.
No, and I think that's a good question. I'm sure that we've all gotten some emails about this, about some people that have jumped on the board of saving water, and they are following other jurisdictions in the country and in the West, saying, I'm going to save water, I'm going to just change all of this. And it's a hard place for us to be when we have a drying lake. So I wonder what the process to do that is. I understand that we don't want to create this duality here. So I don't know what the real solution for that is.
Okay. Last one. Okay.
Sorry, I wanted to make sure and understand. We have some parking strips that currently have rocks, and it is my understanding that perhaps there's an agreement with the adjacent property owners or stewards of the land, but I wanted to make sure that this ordinance helps us promote well-being. These rocks that are placed near 700 South and State Street between State and 200 East, that was meant to be defensive, environmental kind of mitigation to some nuisance problems in the area. I want to make sure, would this help promote that? I mean, or does that all stay there? I mean,
it does.
Well, right. But I mean, I'd like to, I think something that has been a concern of that neighborhood is that we've allowed that there. So I don't know if this is the right verbiage. But
so aggressive architecture might be out now.
Right, right.
Hostile architecture might be out
Yes,
now.
yes, yeah.
Well, I mean, anybody that did an installation before we made changes to the code that was allowed at that time would not be enforced against.
Just ground
But
cover in between.
if more people wanted to make those changes, and assuming we implement it as it is, it would be more difficult for them to do that because they would need to mix in more plant.
This is not that much different than our current code, though.
Right.
So most of the things that we are hearing about are things that were illegal when they were installed.
And I think the challenge is that people really jumped on the bandwagon for artificial turf when it was still illegal. And you'll potentially hear from constituents that are being enforced on because they are pursuing artificial turf, because this code does not allow for it.
So we're 5 minutes over schedule time. I'm happy to continue the conversation. Just want you to know this is our break time and our only break time. Make decisions accordingly.
I mean, I feel like this is one of those issues that, you know, we probably have a lot of opinions between the sizes of the rocks and the mulch, but I don't know.
I think it's easy to accommodate people who made changes that were legal at one point, or who made changes that seemed like they were legal at one point, versus, for me, the turf, I think, is hard because that was never allowed. And it was never unclear about whether it was allowed. And so while people may have gone forth thinking that they were, you know, contributing, the evidence, what I heard from our experts, who, Stephanie, who's not here this time, not that you aren't experts too, but is that is antithetical to what we're trying to do. And so, like, I don't know how you say, like, you didn't follow the policy or the spirit of the law, but we're still going to give you an exception. That's hard for me, because then I feel like it's like, well, then where do we draw the line for any exception?
I think I'm with you on that. I think that the difference is that there are people who thought that they didn't know that they were breaking the law, and they thought they were doing the best thing and spent a lot of money on that. And I do have some sympathy for that. I don't think that's really a planning tool, though, that addresses that. I would think it'd be more something
civil enforcement
with the
kind of thing.
attorney's office, where we say, like, I don't, to my understanding, I don't think our zoning ordinance would say that you can't enforce on this situation, right? I think it would be probably just an ordinance that we write with the attorney's office that says landscapes installed before X date that have these deficiencies will not be. I don't know exactly the tool to do that, but it doesn't seem like something we'd put in the zoning ordinance. Unless, Nick, is you're thinking.
Katie, would you care to chime in?
I'm not sure that I want to do that either, but I think it's a separate discussion to whether we should adopt this ordinance or not.
Okay, well, let's do this. Have you all gotten what you need from us on the things listed on the screen? Yes, you're good on those. On the things that we've added to your to-do list, do you have enough clarity?
I think so.
Okay.
Clarity about the overall park strips and calculating those separately versus calculating them together in terms of the requirements. And then the other one was about the overhead of parking spaces.
And then promoting water conservation to the purpose statement.
And so then our question would be, it comes back to us on the clause about grandfathering and how we want to implement that grandfathering portion of it to the
and maybe that's something the city attorney can help advise us on the best tool for doing. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna postpone the baseball to start 5 minutes later at 4:20 because I need a break and I'm sure you all do too. So please be back in your seats though by 4:20. Thank you. and as promised, I'm calling us back to order. All right, up next, we're going to have the resolution regarding the University of Utah Baseball Stadium Public Benefits Analysis. Jen Bruno from Council will be introducing with Kristen Riker and Kimberly Chytris. Did I say it right? Chytris. Dang it. So close, but so far away. All right, if you all would join us at the table.
And Madam Chair, I believe the mayor is going to join
And
as
we
well.
get the mayor too? Yes. All right.
I'll probably just turn it over to the mayor to introduce it. Thanks.
Hey, Council, thanks for making time for us today on this. I know I don't usually sit up here before you on a work agenda item, but this is an important one, and I know it's one that our community's been having a lot of conversation about. And I'm here to lend my support to what we are bringing you today. I want to underscore that we do not have an executed contract, but that we support these negotiations because these 1.175 acres could absolutely be developed into a new stadium without any participation or contract with the city. But the consequences of that, I believe, are far more detrimental to our community than what we can potentially assure through a contract negotiation and allowing their use of some of our Sunnyside Park land. I think that the $4.2 million investment that they are willing to make into public benefits and remediation of the land that would be impacted are very much worthwhile. And also that despite what some of the reporting recently has said, again, we do not have an executed contract, and the lease rate could be anything less than the assessed value of the land and still require the public benefit analysis, which we are going through, but that those terms have not been executed yet. So Kimberly and Kristen and her team are doing an excellent job, and I think that the university's been an honest broker with us and that this is ultimately the right direction. So thank you for giving me a minute to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mayor. All right, other friends, who knew that baseball would be such a recurring theme in our lives this year? Sports ball, what? All right, Kimberly or Kristen, who's kicking us off here? Or Jen, are you gonna?
I guess maybe I'll just introduce by way that the reason that it's before the council right now is because below market lease requires you guys to weigh in on it and have a public hearing about it. The administration has the role of leasing and selling property, but the fact that it's below market causes it to be a council conversation and triggers a public benefits analysis. And so that's why it's in front of the council now for your discussion.
So we do not have a presentation planned for you. We're here to answer questions if council has any questions.
Councilmember Romano, would you like to kick us off?
What percent below market is $4.2 million, though? Do we know?
So we know that the assessed value of the property is about $435,000. That's for the tax assessment purposes from the county. That's not an appraised value, which could be different. The annual rent on that is somewhere in the neighborhood of $35,000 a year. If you were charging sort of the way that real estate services calculates rent, that would be the rent on the assessed value.
It's depending
probably
on what
about,
it's actually.
I'm over the 99 years, it's probably about 25%.
I see.
Rough, very, very roughly.
The proposal is 4.2 initial investment for public benefits, and then it would be a $0 for 99
well,
years,
the public benefit analysis was written as $1 a year.
$1 a year.
As the mayor mentioned, the state law requiring this kind of public hearing and and decision by the council is anything below sort of a fair value of the property, which is generally interpreted, depending on the situation, to be the assessed value or the appraised value if there is one. So $1 a year is fairly typical for these kind of leases, but is not your only option.
So one question that I was asked that Councilmember Dugan and I had discussed is, is there a legislative tool or a council tool that, if approved, that $4.2 million investment can be, like, how do we make sure that it gets used in Sunnyside Park to improve that facility rather than somewhere else?
You want to answer that, or do you want me to?
Well, that would be done through the agreement that we have with the University of Utah. There are some discussions about using impact fees to supplement Sunnyside Park, and we can use impact fees only for new service that would be provided or new amenities at the park. Our goal is to use the entire $4.2 million at Sunnyside Park. That being said, we cannot use impact fees to build softball fields or a multipurpose field somewhere else. We are hopeful that we could replace those fields using funds outside of impact fees, and be sure to also spend $4.2 million at Sunnyside Park.
And I think to your earlier question,
$4.2 million.
Sorry, say that again.
Are there similar restrictions to impact? The $4.2 million is not an impact fee.
No.
Oh, and I would say that money is more flexible than impact fees. Okay. I was thinking a legislative tool that you might consider is adding language to the resolution that approves the public benefit analysis. That kind of lays the groundwork for what your expectations are that the administration will negotiate in the final contract.
Yeah.
And I'll just add, or reiterate, I guess, that the agreement between the city and the university can specify how that money is used. Because it's more flexible, you might be limiting yourself. It might be, you might be restricted more ultimately in what you build and where, versus using other sources of funds the city has, such as impact fees or bill bonds.
What we're saying is we are committing. There's a $4.2 million agreement that is bringing $4.2 million into our park system. $4.2 million will be spent at Sunnyside Park. Whether 0.2 of that is from impact fees or from this check is immaterial. The concept is that $4.2 million will be spent at this park in direct reaction to this agreement, correct?
That's the proposal.
That's what we're proposing that we would hope council would approve.
It's the difference between restricted and unrestricted funds and nonprofit, so.
Yeah.
And then you all had chosen Sunnyside for your GEO bond as well? Okay, so that's 75,000?
750.
Sorry, dropped to zero. Okay, so that will be added then, bringing the total spent here to $5 million, give or take, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, and that's what we are agreeing to. Yeah?
And you can use other conditions to the extent you want. I missed that part of your question, Councilmember Mono, but the legislative tool here would be to condition an approval on what you want to see in the agreement with the university.
And part of that was use of the stadium itself, the outfield, and some other portions of that facility, as outlined in the staff report.
And really quickly, just for anyone in the public who's tuning in, there's the council staff has put together a website with basic information about the proposal. It's tinyurl.com/U of U baseball Sunnyside Park, all one word. So.
Councilmember Dugan has done an exceptional job of not only staying present in the negotiations, but then keeping all of us updated. Councilmember Dugan, is there anything that you feel is important for us to gain any clarity on the public record around?
Sure. So the just for clarification, where did this $4.2 million come from? How did that come up with that figure? And it was just from a concept design and discussion between the city and the university on a number. And so we had to come up with a baseline and said, hey, this is a baseline concept. You figure out what you think it's going to cost to do this. We'll figure out what it's going to cost us to do this, and we'll come up with numbers. We came up with two different numbers, and we took the higher number, which was our number, which was $4.2 million. And that was just a concept. That this is still goes through, it's still going to go through the engagement process with the community on what to do with that $4.2 million. It doesn't say you're going to do A, B, C. It's going to say we're going to look at the community just like as we do with the other geo bonds in our parks. What do you want to do? And then you just have a, just like you have if we just had $750,000, okay, come up with a concept. Well, you have, this is your budget. You got $750,000. Here we have what do you want to do? You have $5 million to do it in this park.
What's the accountability for us tracking to ensure, like, I am A-okay with using impact fees versus I've done nonprofit math before, I get this. But what's our accountability tracker to make sure that the money actually does go to where we're telling constituents it will go?
I don't see anyone from finance here to help us answer that question. I think that we would work with the U, and that would have to be part of the contract for how we are understanding what they're going to spend, or if they're going to build the project or if we're building the project. It would still come from whatever design we decide to do, the city decides based on community input. But there's a lot of different options for either us building that project, or there could be quite a bit of cost savings and potentially more amenities could be had in the park if the contractor that's building the stadium also builds the park out. So that's been discussed, but certainly nothing's been decided.
So in that scenario then, would a portion of the 4.2 be in kind and not in actual dollars that we receive?
That hasn't been discussed.
Yeah, we still need to figure that out.
Okay.
If that's
I would love clarity around that, please. I'd like to know if we're getting a $4.2 million check to cash, or if there's going to be other.
Yeah. So my understanding so far of the discussions that I haven't been in is that it was a payment of $4.2 million. The university has suggested that there might be some economies of scale if their contractor was able to do some of the work in Sunnyside Park. They've not suggested that would be an in-kind transaction. I don't know the rules well enough to cite off the top of my head whether the city could just tack on to the state's contract to do that work. Normally we can do that in certain circumstances. I'm not sure if that applies in this kind of construction context. So I don't think it's been suggested that that would be in kind, only that there might be economies of scale in doing it at the same time with the same contractor.
Thank you.
And then I'll also say, I think finance would track the costs of the various amenities or improvements at the park to be able to report how the money was used.
Madam Chair, so the important piece here is that the community involvement on what do they want to see in the park. So the economy of scale of a contractor may sound great at first, but if they're far ahead of what the community involvement is on what we want to see in the park, if they're ahead of that, then it may not be wise to do that, because we're digging the trench before we know where we're going to, or they're digging the foundation before we know what kind of house we want. And that's what we want to do. We want to figure out what we want to do there and the costs there before we start digging.
Councilmember Pui.
The concept of getting some in kind versus not doesn't concern me. I trust that our administration and our finance department will track the expenses and make sure that they're accurate. But to Councilmember Dugan's point, we really need to be on the same page on what those improvements are, and that's the only concern I have. So granted that, I think I'm okay with this at the moment.
Anyone else? Councilmember Wharton.
I just want to, I've already heard from some constituents about the softball field issue, and so I want to be sure that my response to them is going to be that you can still give that input, and that a decision could still be made to only lose one softball field instead of two, and that there are going to be other places, other sites available potentially for that. So I just want to make sure that I'm correct when I'm telling those residents that information.
That's absolutely correct. But it hasn't been decided. For sure, there would be one softball field and one multi-purpose field impacted. The concept drawing that we actually asked the U to provide to us, because when they brought this to us, we're like, well, what would the park even look like? Why don't you show us what you think you could do here? And so they provided us a concept drawing that would take out 2 softball fields, but that is just one idea. It's not the community's idea. So we definitely need to go to the community and ask them what they want. And then once all that information is gathered, then we will work with the community and get back with folks. And there are other locations where softball fields could be locaed. One of them is the Regional Athletic Complex.
Right, and for me, it doesn't, I don't think the right way to think about this decision is, do we want to lose a softball field or not? Like, I think that's probably missing the bigger picture here and the bigger opportunity. But I know that for a lot of residents, that is the message that they're already hearing, and I want them to be able to give their feedback about and their concerns about a lack of soccer fields in a way that is constructive. So as long as you're okay with me sending them to you, then that's what I'll do.
Great.
Thanks.
And then just to clarify, sorry.
Oh, no.
No, clarification. Go ahead, Jen.
Kristen, I had a final, I'm curious, how much is maintenance costing, the park currently?
I would have to get that number to you. I don't have that off the top of my head.
I mean, I would feel comfortable with this. I'm really excited by the potential of having this investment in a park that normally wouldn't receive this much attention.
Yeah.
So I'd like to know, do you find the $5 million necessary to the improvements of this park?
This park, like most of our parks, has aging amenities in it. And whenever you have aging irrigation systems or fields that are old and have been used quite a bit, they need more work, for sure. And I think that $5 million would make a huge difference in this park. Absolutely.
Excellent. I just want to put on the record, I play flag football here regularly in the summer, and this park needs a lot of funding. So I'm excited that the university wants to come in and help provide a space for the neighbors of this area. I don't have a regional park really near my neighborhood, so the East Central neighbors would greatly benefit from this.
Yeah. And we're also excited for the synthetic turf field and use of that. We would probably work with the county to help.
That's in the stadium. That's not in the park. That's in
the stadium, not in the park.
Killing us.
Sorry.
Literally killing us.
No, our parks will be all natural. But the nice thing about turf, if you do have to have it, is that the wear and tear is not as severe, and they last a good long time. And there won't be any concerns about us damaging their fields using the synthetic turf. So it could be a really fun opportunity for folks to either play flag football or lacrosse, or possibly even use it as a baseball field.
Jen, was your clarification still standing?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the council understood that the role at this point in the process is to review the public benefits analysis. There will be future roles for the council, including accepting of the $4.2 million, whatever form that ends up taking in a form of a budget amendment. And then if you choose to allocate funds to replace the softball fields after that community engagement process, that would be another appropriation from the council. So there might be a couple more future steps that the council would need to take.
I'd also like to point out that replacing softball fields, especially in other districts, is something that should include the input from those districts. I've not been consulted about anything at the RAC, and I don't know that we've ever heard an accurate calculation for what that actual cost is. So we can say that there's a deficit of X number of softball fields, but our work to replace them is not simply placing them at our discretion. Yeah. All right, anything else? Friends, we have reclaimed our time and we're back on time. I'm just so proud of you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. We are going to move on to an ordinance for zoning text amendments for daycare facilities. Brian Fulmer from Council Policy will return to the table with Cassie Younger and Aaron Barlow from the Planning Department. Hey, just a heads up, if this does happen to go long, we've been really efficient today and I have full confidence in us. If this does happen to go long, we will interrupt so that at 5 we can do our legislative briefing. During legislative session, their times are strict. Just a heads up in case it happens. Thank you.
This is a proposal from the administration to amend requirements in city code related to daycare facilities. The request is to reduce barriers to new and expanding daycare facilities in the zoning ordinance and help ease effects of the daycare shortage. With that, I'll turn it over to Cassie and Aaron.
Barlow.
Can you speak into the microphone a little more?
Oh, sorry. My name is Cassie Younger here with Aaron Barlow, and we're here to present our zoning text amendments on daycare uses. These amendments were a part of Mayor Mendenhall's 2023 goals to eliminate barriers in city code to citing childcare centers. We did this by eliminating zoning barriers in our code and aligning with the state code and the Department of Health and Human Services, the department that runs the childcare licensing in Utah and dictates all the rules and requirements for childcare in the state. So, oops, sorry.
Next slide.
Next slide. One more. Thank you. As some of you may be aware, there's a childcare crisis happening in Utah and around the country. In a 2020 report by the Utah Department of Workforce Services, Salt Lake County has a capacity shortage of over 23,000 children who need care that do not have it. On top of the capacity shortage, in September of 2023, COVID-era federal funding expired that was financially assisting many of these existing facilities. An estimated 633 childcare programs are forecasted to close due to this lack of additional funding. Next slide. And so we've seen these warnings come to fruition already. Here's a map of all the existing home daycares and centers within Salt Lake City. And in just the 4 months since we presented this material at Planning Commission, the numbers on this map have already decreased, including my own child's daycare, which closed in January of this year. And we've had other coworkers that have had centers close on them as well. So these numbers are decreasing as every month passes. And so the additional needs that are identified by this report in 2020 lists 454 additional licensed home daycares and almost 100 daycare centers. And so with the closings that are happening around the city, we can almost guarantee that these are actually less than what is needed right now.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. Could you repeat the number that have closed since you started this study one more time? Sorry.
I only know from personal experience that from October, when we sent this to Planning Commission, my daycare closed for my child, and another coworkers have closed. So I personally know of 2, and I don't know. I don't have like a report that shows that, but that's just from my personal experience.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide, please. So the 2 types of licenses that the city and state issues for daycares are daycare centers, and those are commercial centers, usually found in commercial areas. They're larger, hold more children, and home daycare is usually located within a house as a home occupation. So for daycare centers, the recommended changes that are happening are in response to some of the issues in current code. Specifically, conditional use is required for daycare centers within residential districts. But on top of that conditional use requirement, there are siting requirements that make it even more difficult to site a daycare in these areas. There's a minimum lot size requirement of 20,000 square feet, and they need to be focused or directed on a public arterial street. And there's also a landscape buffer requirement of 10 feet around the perimeter of any play area that isn't required by state code. So you can see on this map here, the areas in yellow are residential properties that where a conditional use would be required but are ineligible for conditional use because of the minimum lot size requirement and arterial street requirement, and only those properties in orange would be eligible for conditional use approval. And you can see it's not nearly as plentiful as the yellow. Next slide, please. So the proposed changes for daycare centers specifically, we're recommending to change from conditional to permitted use in the R1 districts and other residential districts, and then add as a permitted use in the foothill residential districts and some other districts where it is not currently permitted, including the neighborhood business district and the form-based district for smaller areas. And then finally, eliminate conditional use standards so that the process is streamlined for new providers. Next slide, please. And this map shows where daycares would be permitted within the city with these amendments. Next slide. Yeah, all green. Yes, the entire city, excluding specific districts there where this type of use would not really be compatible. Heavy manufacturing districts and extraction districts and open space districts.
Madam Chair, I noticed that in the draft, and maybe I have an old version, but it looked like SR2 was also not included in the permitted table. Can you talk about why?
SR2 is actually not a functioning district at the moment.
We don't have any SR2. Oh, so we can just. That's a good answer. All right.
It's reserved for a future amendment.
Well, apparently I didn't know that.
I just am really excited that we're not letting people take kids out to a forest and call it a daycare. Open spaces are not a permitted, it's not a permitted use in open spaces. Makes sense. As a mom, I endorse this.
That's great. Unless it's go away camp. What about the week-long camp? All right. No, that's a natural open space for the fringes of the community. For home daycares, the home occupation type of use, the proposed changes are intended to streamline that process for those smaller scale daycare providers. Specifically, we're eliminating the definition and regulating of non-registered home daycares, since really that doesn't concern the city. We're also increasing the max number of children allowed in a home daycare from 8 to 16 to align with state code. That number will vary based on ratios in state code. So 16 is the maximum number possible, but based on the ages and the numbers of kids and number of supervisors, those ratios can change.
Madam Chair, and the number of children is also based on the size of the house? I mean, because they each get a size of square foot, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's a required square foot per child in
per child, the number of bathrooms per child or whatever. There's a ratio there.
Yeah, the indoor requirement, I believe, is 35 square feet
30 square feet per child, right?
Care.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that only includes space that is used for daycares, not private bedrooms or unfinished basements and things like that. We also would move the home daycares to the home occupation chapter of the code, where it is currently being regulated. Previously, it was a special exception, and that process was removed several years ago. And then finally, the biggest change would be allow for second licensed home daycares without a primary residential use. And this came out of planning staff's conversations with state regulators, where they've sort of opened up this opportunity to home daycare providers. They saw a need where these providers were doing it anyway, kind of under the table, where a spouse would be the home occupation owner for one unit, and the provider would be that home occupation person at another unit. This process kind of puts the city out of the way of that, what the state does to enable state regulators to manage the home daycares. Next slide, please. So yeah, the state allows home daycares within a second living space as long as they're living there 50% of the time. And currently under home occupation code, they have to live there full time. Omitting this rule removes any barriers the city might place on that. So next slide.
Sorry, can I, clarification here. So say I own 2 homes and they're right next door to each other, and I live in one of them. Can the other one be a daycare also? I don't live in it 50% of the time, but I have 2 homes, but one's not being.
Yes, that's
Okay.
what we're saying.
Okay, that's what we were saying. Okay, that's how I was reading it.
If you are running a home daycare and you are successful and you want to open a second home daycare and you have a second house, we're saying that this second home daycare, you would not have to live in full time.
Okay. And you don't have to live in it. There's no limit. You don't even have to live in it at all. It could be a full-time 100% daycare. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right.
I apologize. The 50% rule is state requirements, and we want to remove city requirements out of their way. So in summary, daycare centers, the proposal is to eliminate conditional use standards and add those, allow it within the entire city. Home daycares, increase the maximum number to match state requirements, eliminate unregistered daycares, and allow that second home daycare. Next slide. I believe that's it. And we're happy to answer any questions now at this point.
Council? Yes, Councilman.
So with these changes, which I fully support, are there any additional barriers or I guess additional requirements that the city has on daycares that are different than what the state requires? Like, are there any, pieces that are still there?
Yeah, we did our best to really go through and match or align with the state code so there wouldn't be any additional barriers. Our goal was that if someone is going through the state licensing process, then it should be very easy to get, the zoning process over with from the city standpoint, and there should not be anything additional.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anyone?
I appreciate this, and I didn't realize that pretty much half the city now, it doesn't allow daycares. I was pretty shocked by that. So I appreciate the work here, and I like the openness now that we can have daycares. Would you think that you'd see a lot more daycares go in? Would that spur more daycares in different neighborhoods? Do you think that, just like ADUs, are you going to see that?
Councilmember Young seems to want to answer this.
Yeah. I do. So I think, okay, I'm going to couch it this way. The city taking action to reduce barriers is incredibly important because at this point, there are a multitude of barriers to establishing a daycare that is not just city components, it's also state expectations and regulations. And to be quite honest, it's also being able to staff those centers based on the requirements for certain numbers of staff based on the age of the children that you support and the ability to bring in that revenue in a family by family, child by child basis to be able to provide a livable wage to any of those individuals, let alone being able to compete with your traditional standard wage for fast food. So there's a lot in that space, and I think the city taking action helps to address a piece of it. Do I think that that's the number one barrier? I don't, but I think it's important that we take actions where we can so that the greater community can come together to figure out outside of the city what resources exist to really support more opportunities for parents.
This is not for planning. This is an excellent start. Do we have any other places in the city where we could inadvertently be holding up like business licensing or anything like that? Do we know? Do they have to come through us for business licensing, or is the state licensing? I'm fully in support of this. I just want to make sure that as we're doing this, we're comprehensively thinking about our role in daycare centers and okay. Thank you all for your time and for your work on this. Were you able to find other childcare, or are they just hanging out in your office right now?
They're just upstairs.
That's what my kids do too.
I did find other ones, but it's tough out there.
Yeah, and so expensive.
Yeah.
So, all right, thank you all so much. We are 6 minutes early for this legislative briefing. How do you like us now, Kate?
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here and see all of your faces. I'm Angela Price, the Legislative Affairs Director.
And I am Kate Bradshaw, your outside contract lobbyist.
We are going to whip through a few bills here for you guys pretty quickly to keep you on task on your agenda. Feel free to stop us if you have any questions. Tomorrow is the official halfway point of the legislative session, which we are very excited about.
Halfway in time.
Halfway in time. That's a very important distinction. Thank you. Not halfway in the amount of work. Cam on Monday from the Utah League of Cities and Towns said we have about 90% of the work to do yet. Feels very real. So we're all bracing for that impact. We have over 744 bills this morning. That number has increased, and the city's tracking 268. So we're doing better than previous years on how many bills we're tracking. Our team has been exceptional working with our departments on getting amendments, and our lobby team has just been doing really great work up at the Capitol. So huge amount of gratitude to Kate for spearheading those efforts and to our entire lobby team for all of their work. Want to go through a couple of key areas for you guys. First, starting with homelessness. We are working closely to ensure that we get the various appropriations that the governor has requested for homelessness. It is an uphill climb this legislative session, knowing that we don't have a big surplus as we've had in years past. And so we are working closely to ensure those appropriations go through and really painting the picture of the work that we're doing here in Salt Lake City and how the increase in winter overflow beds has allowed us to see visible changes on our streets here in Salt Lake City. So that is a strong message that we're communicating up at the Capitol. There were yesterday in social services appropriations, the homelessness and housing building block line items were assigned numbers. Most of them are in the 20s and 30s, meaning that's where they're at in the prioritization list. The increase in mitigation funding, $2.5 million, was, I believe, 6 on that list. I can pull that up here in a second. So that's an important piece, obviously, for us here in Salt Lake. A caveat on that is knowing that we have 2 additional cities that will also be getting mitigation funding now, Sandy with their MVP shelter, and then Twillow with their shelter that they've opened as well. So those funds are being spread out between more cities, but the great news is that other cities are stepping up and helping as well. So we have several homelessness bills that we're working on. I should also add that one of the appropriations that we're really excited about and hoping that we get is for Home Court, which is a Salt Lake County specific diversion program that has a $10.6 million request for a pilot, which would allow individuals to go through a diversion program so that they can get services that they need if they have mental illness and whatnot, and not just be cycled through the criminal justice system. So a few bills to just have on your radars. HB 421, this is Elison's homelessness amendments. This includes shelter, it includes a prioritization for shelter services. It increases the code blue threshold from 15 to 18 degrees. Keep in mind that that always includes wind chill as well. It specifically links panhandling to our mitigation funding, and so we're working with the sponsor and with the state homeless coordinator on understanding what that metric would be and what that will look like for the city. It makes changes to the mitigation fund and adds additional shelter bed provisions. HB 298, I believe, passed the floor this afternoon, right, Kate? Sorry to put you on the spot on that. I saw it on as I was walking out. This is Representative Clancy's bill. We are in support of this bill. It passed out of committee last Friday, and it gives Mayor Mendenhall or Salt Lake City a permanent seat on the State Homeless Council. It allows for 1 additional mayor and 2 county representatives. It does cut the council almost in half, so we are incredibly grateful to Representative Clancy for that permanent seat for Salt Lake City on the State Homeless Council. The last one that we'll mention is HB 314. This is Representative Abbott's bill. And this removes the mayors from the Homeless Council, which we obviously are concerned about, and decreases the mitigation fund. We're recommending an opposed position on this bill. And I forgot to mention on HB 421, Representative Elison's bill, we're still a pending position on that one as we work with the sponsor. Anything that you'd like to add on homelessness, Kate?
What I would also put on your radar, besides just the bills, is a date coming up on the calendar, and that is February 15th. The state budgets to revenue estimates, and right now they're using estimates from November. They'll get updated revenue estimates in February. We've talked about before, we've used the joke analogy, it's a socks and underwear Christmas at the Capitol. The budget is thin, there's not a lot of revenue growth. So the state's able to fund existing programs for the most part, and those pass in base budgets. But a lot of the things that we're supportive of in homelessness would be in new appropriations. So these are increases in programs or entirely new programs, new funding. And so when those February 15th numbers come in, is going to be really critical to how much money there is for them to do in these new supplemental appropriations. Those are the budget bills that pass at the end of the session. And so right now, everything is just kind of jockeying in position, trying to be, closer. It feels like we've already been in the race for a while. We're not. We're in the pre-race for budgeting. So you're just trying to position yourself close to the starting gates, because after the 15th, until we get to March 1st, that's really when the appropriations race begins to be at the front of the pack in terms of who's going to get funded.
So in terms of that and the funding piece, I have 2 quick questions. So when you say we're in the 20s to 30s on the list for those other components, is that broken out for that committee by one-time versus ongoing? So are we 20 to 30 out of one-time requests or just out of the comprehensive list?
Some of the requests have a one-time component, like for instance, home court has a one-time component. And it has ongoing components. Mitigation, we are currently funded with one time, and we're hoping to make the jump into ongoing. So they're in both categories, and across the board, they're in the, we're in the probably the top third, which is a good spot to be. Social services is a tough budget.
Yeah.
Everything that comes through social services is about people's lives and the quality of their lives, and sometimes whether they'll continue to have a good quality of life. So it's a really tough committee. So would I have liked for all of these to be ranked as like 1, 2, and 3 coming out of? Yes. But to be in the top third is still a good spot as we position for the real appropriations work that will come after the 15th.
Great. And I guess my follow-up to that is, I will be the first to say ongoing funding reigns supreme in terms of ideal to funding systemic solutions. If there are opportunities for us to look at what components could be adopted one time related to being able to potentially move up that ranking list, if there aren't many one-time requests, knowing that money tends to be a little more forthcoming in the revision of the budget, I just would support us in looking at those opportunities.
Absolutely, and we were in a meeting yesterday with House leadership and the mayor, and Andrew Johnston was there, and have made sure that we are trying to coordinate as much as possible with Wayne Niederhauser and the Office of Homelessness Services, so that this is the time where you start the session with your big ask, and then now you're starting to get to the real ask, which is exactly what you're pointing to. If we have to accept one-time funding, what are the most critical things? If we have to scale, what are the most important elements to keep? And so we're making sure that that the Salt Lake team is dovetailing with the governor's team in continuing to jockey so that we're in a good spot for the second half of the session.
Are we?
Deep breath. Are you bracing yourself?
I thought there was another question.
Yeah, are
maybe
we? No?
Okay.
Good.
No.
Okay. So we'll move on to housing. I want to just point out that I know that some of the council members have been watching the ownership bills and the policy around home ownership, which obviously is a really big concern to Salt Lake City and a priority of the city council, mayor, and the RDA board. So I just want to I want to shed a little bit of light on this, that there's a lot of conversation happening around home ownership. And yes, Ray Ward's bill, HB 306, is not moving forward, but that is not because there isn't additional work happening around home ownership policy and funding. So I just want to make sure that that's on your guys' radar, that the Utah League of Cities and Towns has been working diligently with Steve Waldrop and others on finding a pathway forward on advancing Governor Cox's Starter Home Initiative. So just know that that's being worked on very heavily, and we're working on different funding proposals and different policy proposals there. So when we have more information to share there, we certainly will do that.
So sorry. Right now there's no real home ownership bill that we're kind of specifically focused on, because the one is 304 is not really going anywhere.
Correct. Yeah. So HB 306 was Representative Ward's bill, and that bill's not advancing right now. And so there are a lot of other conversations happening, and so we're hoping to see some of that language soon. There's 3 housing and land use bills that we have seen drop so far. That's HB 476, the municipal land use regulations, Representative White, HB 465, housing affordability revisions, also Representative White, and SB 168, housing affordability amendments with Senator Fillmore. These 3 bills are all bills that we worked on in the interim through the Land Use Task Force and have gone through the Commission on Housing Affordability and the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission. Salt Lake City, myself and Paul Nielsen from the Attorney's Office have been negotiators on these land use bills, and so we've been at the table for months on the various policies and the implications that they have to Salt Lake City. These do a wide range of things, from cleaning up technical parts of the Land Use Management Act, allows for modular development that was really based off of the innovative work that we do here in Salt Lake City and our modular code. It allows for agreements on the RDA housing set aside. It makes some minor changes to the first-time homebuyer program that passed last year by President Adams. It does not make the changes that we would like there, Councilmember Dugan, but we're still working on that piece. And then it adds some penalties for moderate income housing plan non-compliance. So all things that we knew were coming, but just flagging those for you. We have anything you want to add on housing, Kate?
No, I think you're the expert there.
We have 3 free exercise of religion bills that would impact city employees. The lobby team and our staff is working closely with the sponsors on. These are HB 396 workplace discrimination amendments by Brammer, SB 150 exercise of religion amendments, Senator Weiler, and HB 460 government employee conscious protection amendments, Representative Peterson. Just putting these on your radar. Again, we're working closely with the sponsor and our partners on these 3 bills, as they would have a substantial impact to Salt Lake City. And then I'm going to end on an exciting piece of information, which we don't always get to report to you. So I love when I can come with good news on the front and the back end, which today the league issued an action alert. Well, they kind of did this yesterday in in Legislative Policy Committee, but again today on SB 172 protection area revisions. This is Senator Hinkins' bill that is really targeted at counties and mining operations and extension of those mining operations. And we have been told that that bill will be held in rules for now. So we have a victory today that we can celebrate, and we're very excited about that. So again, the power of the league and our lobby team, we activated a partnership last Friday with multiple entities, and we're seeing that come to fruition. So know that our voices are strong and they matter. So with that, anything else that you want to add?
I just checked on the legislative tracker, and SB 172 has been formally moved from committee back to rules.
Yay!
So
exciting. Educate
all of us here. So it goes to committee, then rules, and then back, or it goes to rules committee. How does that work?
No. So if you recall from my favorite PBS show, I'm Just a Bill on Capitol Hill, which I feel like we should all know. So the bill is introduced and it's read into the Chamber of Origin for the first time. That's its first reading. From there, it'll go to the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee sifts the bills into various standing committees. So education or revenue and taxation or business and labor. From there, if the bill receives a positive vote, it would advance to the floor of the chamber it originates in for a vote. And then if it passes, then it would reverse to the other chamber and start that process again. It's read into the floor, moves to the Rules Committee, moves to the floor, then to the governor's desk. So when a bill does not advance out of its committee, so it's either it's voted down or the sponsor requests it to be returned to rules, if you go backwards in the process, it usually isn't a good sign. It means you're not progressing towards the governor's desk, you're going in the opposite direction. So to have this bill go to committee and then have the committee return it to the Rules Committee is a signal that they don't feel like it would pass. And so they're returning it to the safekeeping of that committee. The only further step that could be taken that would definitively end this bill's progress for the session would be for a motion to strike the enacting clause on the bill. It's very rare. I've seen it happen when things have blown up at the Capitol, but it's very, very rare. So this is kind of the most sure step that something won't advance, is to send it backwards in the process to the Rules Committee.
Like so many other bills, we've seen them take a breather during one session only to be revived the next, on steroids with all of the kinks ironed out. Is this one of those things that we need to stay at the table and negotiating around? I didn't get the impression from our briefing during the league meeting that the sponsors of this bill, the people asking for it, are going to back away quietly. Do you have any tea leaves readings for that?
I would say there's continued tension, particularly around the issue of gravel pits. As population moves closer to those types of operations, you end up with tensions. It's obviously a necessary component to our modern lives and roads and buildings and all that kind of stuff. So you end up with this tension around those types of operations. And I don't think this issue is necessarily going to go away. I think it'll likely go away for this session, but it will probably be back in future sessions. And so there will probably need to be work done by Salt Lake City and by the League of Cities and Towns and by different mining operators about how operations address the work they do to gain a critical building material and how that meshes with the land use authority that cities exercise and the fact that you're becoming closer to population centers.
Thank you. Councilmember Horton.
I just want to thank you for all of the hard work that you guys have done. This session, I think, will definitely always stick out in my mind as being difficult. And I'm really, really glad that we were able to make the changes in time to bring Angela into this position and to get the team in place, and really appreciate your responsiveness. I have felt and feel like there's been a big difference and improvement in the communication and all of those things, and I think it's been so necessary this year too, because things seem like they're just moving at light speed. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and I hope you keep going.
I am also grateful that you all enabled this change, because from the outside perspective, it was always difficult to make sure you had all the things you need. So I am grateful.
Council members, anything else? So I would just like to remind everyone that if you come from the Judeo-Christian, you get to freely practice your religion and express it by taking care of those less fortunate than us, that include homeless people. So I'm really excited about the way these two bills could potentially align, and appropriation requests we could expect to see funded. So
Thank you so much for your time on the agenda. You know how to get a hold of me if you need me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Council, we are going to be entering into closed session.
Madam Chair, should we do announcements really quick before we
Absolutely.
do closed session, so that we can just be out of the work session when we're done with closed session? I just had one quick one. The ULI, which is actually the Urban Land Institute, is having a spring conference in New York City in mid-April, April 9th and 11th, and Councilmember Mono and actually Councilmember Pui have let me know that they would like to attend. It's not one of the pre-approved conferences, because it's not APA. So they would like to know, does the council support travel for council members Mono and Pui to attend the conference? Okay, great. Thanks. Several RDA staff will apparently also be there, so that'll be great to connect. So thanks. And then, Madam Chair, I think you can do the motion for closed session now.
We are going in to closed session for the purpose of strategy sessions to discuss the purchase, exchange, or lease of real property, and for attorney-client matters.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I would like to also add strategy session to discuss collective bargaining.
And strategy session to discuss collective bargaining. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for giving me the chance to write that. I would like to move that we go into a closed session for a strategy, closed session to strategize, as a strategy session to discuss the purchase and exchange or lease of real property, attorney-client matters, and a strategy, and I didn't write clearly
Collective
enough,
bargaining.
to discuss collective bargaining.
And when we reconvene, we'll be adjourned?
Yes.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Councilmember Pui, a second from Councilmember Dugan. Any discussion on the matter? I'll roll call. Councilwoman Young?
Aye.
Councilmember Pui?
Aye.
Councilmember Mono?
Aye.
Councilmember Wharton?
Aye.
Councilwoman Lopez Chavez?
Aye.
Councilmember Dugan?
Aye.
We are now in closed session.
Good job.
Oh, and I'm an aye. We are now in closed session, for real.